Imperishable Emperor's Grace author, Julia Huo copywriting. It took a long time for Yu Qingjie to learn that she was the original heroine in the female supporting role, and the other party held the female supporting system in their hands, and was gearing up to grab her chance. Hee. Anyway, sooner or later, she is going to die, so it's better to live comfortably. Yu Qingjie completely let herself go, relying on her being a legitimate daughter. She played her life against her father's newly brought back beautiful concubine. This little concubine is not a good stubble either. As they come and go, the relationship between the two of them becomes bigger and bigger. Later, she gradually realized that something was wrong. Why is her deadly enemy a man? He is also a wanted man of the royal family, the youngest son of the deposed prince, and a famous tyrant in the future. The royal family of this dynasty has a secret. For example, although the royal men are all beautiful and good at fighting, they are bloodthirsty by nature, paranoid and cruel from their genes. Murongyan fell from the clouds into the dust when he was young, and even had to disguise himself as a woman to avoid spies in the backyard of his followers. After great changes, the tyrannical element in his body could hardly be controlled until he saw Yu Qingjie, his nominal daughter. In his restless and dark world, the sun suddenly shone in. Number, I love you more than life, I have everything I want, but if I am going to die, the first thing I do is kill you. The most difficult to bear the Emperor's favor. Note: 1. Overlord and concubine-like relationship, he ending. The male protagonist is paranoid and beautiful, possessive, and the female protagonist is Yu Myron too. The background of the southern and northern dynasties is overhead 3. Happy to follow the article. Please do not post bad comments such as insults, life attacks, etc. in the comment area. Thank you. Content tags: Court marquee sweet text where book search keywords, protagonist, Yu Qingjie, Murongyan supporting role. Others comments on works. Yu Qingjie learned that her cousin was bound to the female supporting system, and was sharpening her sword to take away her chance as the original heroine. Yu Qingjie was waiting for death, so she let herself go to make things difficult for her father's new vixen concubine. One day, I suddenly discovered that the other party didn't seem to be a woman. He was a male protagonist who disguised himself as a female, and a famous tyrant in the future. The theme of this article is novel, the setting of the male and female protagonists is interesting, and the struggle between the concubine and the concubine is common in the house fight. The male protagonist has a special identity, beautiful and paranoid by nature. With the deepening of the relationship between the male and female protagonists, the joys and sorrows of the past and present, and the hegemony of the northern and southern countries to unify the world, also kicked off. The moonlight quietly shone on the green wood floor, and the surroundings were silent. Only a wisp of incense rose from the mouth of the green beast, lingering and circling, and finally mixed with the smoky curtain, melting into the dark and heavy night inside. Behind the 5 ink painting screens, a huge curtain hangs down from the beam in the shape of an inverted bucket, tightly covering the 8-foot bed inside. I couldn't see clearly through the curtain, but I could vaguely see a few strands of black hair winding around the couch, and because it was too long, there was another strand hanging down on the ground. But the owner of Qingxi looked uneasy. There is a young girl lying in the layers of curtains. She is about 13 or 14 years old. She is still young, but her brows are already showing her beauty. But now, her 2 slender eyebrows were tightly frowned, as if she had dreamed of something that made her feel uneasy. She saw herself lying down under the heavy curtains, losing her breath without a sound. She saw that her cousin was very satisfied and famous all over the world. Before, holding a comb and combing her hair slowly, a voice suddenly sounded out of nowhere in the empty room: "Congratulations to the host, the counterattack was successful." The cousin admired the unparalleled beauty in the mirror, and smiled. The heroine is finally dead, and the rest of the plot of the original book is finally free for me to play. The heroine is dead, and the Yu family has also been subdued by me. What I did was to capture King Lanja and become the founding queen. Congratulations to the host. King Lanja is the son of destiny, and he is destined to unify the 300 years of troubled times. According to historical records, after King Lanja unified the world, he appointed the sixth daughter of the Yu family as his queen. He was moody, but he was obedient to Queen Yu. Has never accepted other concubines in her life, and is known as Empress Mingzi in history. As long as the host marries him in place of the heroine, it will be a lifelong honor and favor, and the descendants will be emperors for generations. But, he's just the regent now. The current little emperor was established by him alone. No one in the northern dynasty knew that although the throne belonged to the emperor, in this world, the uncle Lanja king had the final say. Soon, Lanja king will destroy the north in a battle in Heian. Zhao crossed the river in the winter of the same year, captured the emperor of the southern dynasty alive at the bottom of the well, and from then on, the north and the south belonged to King Lanja. When that day comes, will the little emperor be able to decide whether he wants to be in Zen or not? Yu Qingji, the fourth young lady of the Yu family, smiled resolutely. You're right, King Lanja is cruel and ruthless, the throne is only temporarily kept by the little emperor, how can he tolerate others sitting down all the time? You can predict the plot of the original text, really. It's a great help. It's just that we secretly poisoned the heroine to death, and the role of the heroine and the heroine, don't worry, the meeting between the two of them hasn't started yet. As long as you follow our instructions, it will be easy to replace the heroine. Yu Qingji breathed a sigh of relief when she heard the words. She used up all her points this time before exchanging the colorless and odorless poison from the system and mixing it into Yu Qingji's tea. She no longer has any more points to exchange for gold fingers, that is to say, she can only rely on herself for the rest. Yu Qingji endured the ecstasy in her heart, and said to the system, I am able to counterattack this time, thank the system for its great help, we have a happy cooperation. The mechanical electronic sound also seemed to be rippling with some kind of joyful emotion. Such words were spoken from the rigid electronic synthesis voice, with an indescribable weirdness, host, happy cooperation. What host? What counterattack? Who is the heroine and who is the supporting actress? Yu Qingji broke free from the dream and sat up on the bed clutching her heart. She was only wearing a middle coat, her shoulders were thin, and her slightly messy hair covered half of her body. Under the messy clothes, she was even more talented and stunningly beautiful. Yu Qingji panted heavily, and it took a long time before she felt the thorn in her back, like being stared at by a poisonous snake, to dissipate. She spread her palms, looked at her slender fingers like jade, then raised her head and looked around. That's right, this is the Taishao mansion of Guangling County, Qingzhou, and this is her boudoir. Yu Qingji sat blankly for a long time, then lifted the curtain lightly and got out of bed. She didn't disturb anyone, opened the window with bare feet, and stared at the bright moon in the sky for a long time across the courtyard with deep green eaves. Who on the riverside sees the moon for the first time, and when does the river moon shine on people? The night wind blew over Yu Qingji's hair that was scattered over her shoulders, gently blowing up a few strands of hair. A girl in plain clothes and long hair stood leaning on the window in the night, beautiful but weak, clear, and gorgeous, just like the of Luoshan coming to the world. Yu Qingji's thoughts also returned to the dream just now. She is the youngest daughter of Yu Wenjun, the prefect of Guangling County, Qingzhou, and the sixth lady of the Yu family in Yanzhou. Yu Wenjun and his wife Yu's childhood sweethearts have a deep affection, and they have cherished their only daughter like a jewel since they were young. Although the family strife is serious, Yu Qingji has never suffered much since she was a child. She grew up carefree under the love of her parents. 14. But the dreams of the last few nights shattered Yu Qingji's peaceful and leisurely life in the boudoir. She never knew that she was the heroine of a book. This book is disdainfully called The Heroine of Mary Sue by an electronic voice. It is nothing more than a story about a girl who grew up under the care of her parents. Then she experienced a series of adventures when she was a girl. She met several princes and grandchildren of aristocratic families. The male protagonist asks for marriage, and when the male protagonist dominates the world, Mary Sue will also be upgraded to a later story. It's really embarrassing, this Mary Sue heroine is Yu Qingjie. Yu Qingjie didn't know whether a person's life could really be determined by a book, but she knew that her life might go wrong. Because, the current world is not in Mary Sue Wen, but in a female supporting article from the perspective of the original heroine's cousin. This female supporting role is the heroine's cousin, but her past life was dismal. After being reborn with hatred, she found out that she was only a female supporting role. She was filled with resentment, which attracted a female supporting system. From then on, with the help of the female supporting system, the cousin suddenly became proficient in all kinds of piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Sue Da's charm, Bao Si's sorrow, as long as she had points, she could easily redeem them. The medicine that poisoned Yu Qingjie to death later, which obviously did not belong to the ancient plane, came from the system. Yu Qingjie was in a daze through the dream, and couldn't deeply feel the joys and sorrows inside. But when she saw herself lying on the ground silently and lost her voice, she still felt very sad. The cousin had a bad life after getting married in her previous life, which had nothing to do with Yu Qingjie, but after her rebirth, the cousin blamed others for all the blame, and deliberately plundered Yu Qingjie's life that originally belonged to her. For example, write out the music composed by Yu Qingjie in the previous life in advance, and find the beggar who is still a beggar on the street corner but will show great ambitions after being helped by Yu Qingjie, and there are many things that Yu Qingjie didn't see clearly in his dream, but now he has remembered it can't stop. Thinking of this, Yu Qingjie smiled slightly. She was standing in the moonlight in Suyi, smiling like a fairy in the moon palace, with an unreal and fragile beauty. But even so, it couldn't hide the mockery in Yu Qingjie's eyes. Yu Qingjie deliberately wanted to replace the heroine, and even secretly poisoned Yu Qingjie to death, but in the end, Yu Qingjie failed to get the posthumous position she dreamed of. Because, the Yu family was wiped out by Lanja King Murongyan, except for Yu Qingjie's father Yu Wenjun, no one was spared. After King Lanja unified the north and the south, the little emperor actively took the initiative to sit on the eaves of the king's uncle Murong within a few days. Murongyan ascended the throne and proclaimed himself emperor, the world was unified, and the whole world was submissive. What countless heroes had painstakingly failed to achieve in the past 300 years was actually accomplished by him, a young man under 20. However, after Murongyan came to the throne, he did not become a wise king as everyone expected, but a strong and iron blood, killing people like hemp, and implementing a reign of terror over the whole world. He is not a faint king, but a more terrifying tyrant. Yu Qingjie looked at the bright and flawless outside the window, and stared carefreely at the bright moon in the world, and sighed faintly. She started to have this kind of dream a few days ago. At first she thought it was just wild thinking, but as the dream progressed and the details in the dream became more and more detailed, Yu Qingjie felt something was wrong. It seems that what is the foreseeing dream, but what is predicted is something about her. Yu Qingjie spread her hands, and the moonlight leaked through her fingers. Yu Qingjie tried to clench her palms tightly, but in vain. Yu Qingjie said in a low voice, "So the heroine is the original sin? I don't think I am the heroine, and I don't think my fate is determined by a book. Your bad life in your previous life has nothing to do with me, and I don't care about it. I don't want to be a stepping stone on your way to upgrade and kill monsters." Yu Qingjie blew the wind for a long time the night before, and when she woke up the next day, she really felt dizzy. When she thought about it carefully, everything in the dream seemed to be separated by a layer of fog, becoming blurred. "I can't see many things clearly. Sure enough, predicting the future is forbidden by the law of heaven, and now it is repairing the loopholes. I am afraid that only the cousin who is possessed by the system can escape the balance of the law of heaven and kill all directions with the foresight golden finger." Yu Qingjie was afraid that in a few days, she would completely forget about this matter, and if she didn't realize it, wouldn't she be plotted to death by the system and her cousin again? How can a mortal body be able to defeat the advanced intelligent body from the future and the most advanced plane trading technology? She kept repeating those important names in her heart. Later, the forced erasure by the Dao of Heaven became more and more serious. Yu Qingjie abandoned the names of the hero, the beggar, and the names of the great generals and prime ministers, and just kept silently reciting the 5 names. Character, Yu Qingjie. System. System, Yu Qingjie. Yu Qingjie, her cousin, daughter of the big house. The system comes from advanced technology and does not belong to the intelligent body of the plane. 3 days later, the revision of the Dao of Heaven was finally over, and Yu Qingjie also heaved a long sigh of relief. These things cannot be written down, only one's own brain is a field that the heavens cannot interfere with. Facts proved that she won. She still remembered that she was the extremely disliked Mary Sue heroine, but now in a supporting novel, she was poisoned to death by her cousin, and the last tyrant ascended the throne and wiped out the Yu family. In other words, if you don't want the halo of Mary Sue anymore, let's save your life first. Because it involved life and death, Yu Qingjie actually remembered the name of that tyrant, Lanja King Murong Yan. However, now that King Lanja is clearly a wanted criminal by the royal family, what happened in the middle, and it turned out that he regained power and unified the world in the end? Yu Qingjie tried hard to think about it, but still couldn't remember anything. She is like a lazy student with no solid foundation, only knows the beginning and the end. As for the middle process, it is blank. As for what the culprit of the massacre in the previous life looked like, and why he slaughtered the Yu family's family, she naturally had no impression. Bai Ji sat on her knees behind the food table, saw Yu Qingjie moved her chopsticks a few times before putting them down again, and said sadly, "Miss, you don't want to eat now?" "No appetite, can't eat." Bai Ji watched Yu Qingjie grow up since she was a child, and her closeness is second only to her biological mother, Yu Shi. Bai Ji also loves Yu Qingjie as her own sister in her heart. Bai Ji saw that her young lady had been dispirited for several days, and she didn't even have any appetite for meals, so she was indescribably worried. "Miss, do you have anything on your mind these few days?" Thinking of Yu Qingjie and the system who were staring at him covetously, Yu Qingjie shook her head flatly. "No, it's just that I miss my father a little, so I don't have an appetite." Only then did Bai Ji breathe a sigh of relief. The young lady and the prefect father and daughter have always had a deep relationship. The prefect has been away from home for more than 10 days, this date is really unreasonably long, the young lady is so worried that she can't even eat, which is justified. Although Yu Qingjie used her father as a cover-up, in fact she was really worried about his father's whereabouts. Yu Qingjie asked, "Father is visiting a friend, haven't you come back today?" Her father, Yu Wenjun, the prefect of Guangling County, was a well-known refined scholar with a lofty personality. He didn't like to host banquets and socialize, and didn't like to keep prostitutes for fun. He only indulged in mountains and rivers and played the piano every day. Yu Wenjun's temperament is naturally incompatible with the mainstream, but it has also attracted a wave of like-minded people. Yu Wenjun often visits friends and hermits, visits famous mountains and rivers, and it is very common for Yu Wenjun not to return for 5 or 6 days. But since A Niang passed away, my father has rarely left home. When he arrived in Guangling County, because she was the only woman in the government office, the father would not leave his daughter behind and go out by himself. So it was really unusual for Yu Wenjun to leave the mansion for so long. Bai Ji shook her head and said she didn't know. Yu Qingjie didn't make things difficult for her, just sighed. Yu Qingjie had the couch moved to the window, and she knelt on the couch, staring at the late spring scenery outside the window in a daze. She was wearing a red wide-sleeve cross-collar jacket, and a red and white intercolor skirt underneath, and a layer of milky white spun gauze over the skirt. Light when moving, beautiful as a picture scroll when still. At this time, appearance is highly respected, being an official depends on appearance, being famous depends on appearance, and promotion also depends on appearance. The Northern dynasty was slightly better than the Southern dynasty because the people in power were good at martial arts, but it was only 50 steps, laughing at 100 steps. Yu Qingjie is a beauty worthy of overthrowing the country. She has sandal hair like clouds, thick eyebrows and eyes, but the corners of her eyes seem to be hooked, with a kind of inadvertent weakness and temptation. There was once a son of a noble family who happened to see Yu Qingjie in the ancestral house in Yanzhou, and couldn't help turning his head after walking 5 steps. He was amazed, and said with a smile to the left and right, "I heard that the Yu family has a beauty, so looking at it this way, the name of the beauty is really well deserved." After this incident, Yu Qingjie's name of Poppy spread. Poppies are also a kind of flower, with slender stems and rich color, weak and beautiful, blooming in full bloom as if they have exhausted their life's blood. This title is a bit frivolous, and there is an allusion to Yu Myron and Farewell My Concubine. In short, it sounds very unlucky, so Yu Qingjie doesn't like others to call it that way. But now that Bai Ji is serving behind the incense burner, the more she looks at it, the more she feels that her young lady is really like a poppy. Yu Qingjie didn't feel it when she was smiling before, but today she was leaning against the window with a little melancholy, her red and white wide skirt meandering on the couch like blooming flowers. She looked slender, beautiful, with a poppy-like look, unbearable weakness. Bai Ji couldn't help but think of Yu Qingjie's name Poppy, and from the poppies to the story of overlord and concubine Yu, thinking that her young lady is so precious, she is worthy of being bowed down by a first-class hero in the world. But then Bai Ji hurriedly pooh-poohed in her heart, the overlord killed Wuzhao before he died, don't concubine Yu, their young lady and future lord would not be like this. Not only Bai Ji, but other servants in the prefect's mansion were also surprised by Yu Qingjie's unusual quietness. In fact, Yu Qingjie is a very lively character. Although the Yu family left early, she loved her only daughter like a treasure when she was a child. Yu Wenjun also cared for her daughter very much. Yu Qingjie's calligraphy was taught by Yu Wenjun himself. The mother is gentle and virtuous, and the father is kind and upright. A daughter who grows up in such a family must be optimistic and confident, and she can shine into people's hearts with a pursed smile. Because of the dispute between the eldest and second wife of the Yu family, Yu Qingjie was not favored by the head of the family, Mr. Yu, but this did not prevent the servants of the second wife from sincerely liking their beautiful and lively young lady. To Bai Ji, her Miss Jiajia is like the bright moon in the sky and the stars in the world, which can't be compared with that mean daughter-in-law of Da Fang. Bai Ji couldn't stop thinking wildly, and suddenly heard Yu Qingjie ask, during this time, "Is there any letter from the ancestral house?" Ever since Yu Qingjie learned of the existence of female supporting roles in the system, she has been restless for several days. No one will ignore the obvious hostility, and no one will care about their own image and reputation, and Yu Qingjie is likely to kill herself. Yu Qingjie didn't feel that she owed Yu Qingjie anything, and it didn't make sense for her to walk around Yu Qingjie from then on because of the inexplicable title of heroine. She doesn't believe that rebirth is omnipotent, but she doesn't believe that there is no justice in the world, and she can run amok by relying on her talent and fame for nothing. Yu Qingjie was at a loss when she thought of this. In the dream, when did Yu Qingjie poison her? She only knew that the poison was colorless and tasteless, and was mixed in the water. However, it is impossible for her to stop drinking water from now on. The memory was like a cloud of fog. Yu Qingjie thought hard, until his head hurt from thinking, but he didn't think of anything. Her memory involves things that didn't happen, which were deliberately covered up by Tiandao. In other words, she had to rely on her own judgment to escape this catastrophe of life and death. But having said that, no matter how many plans Yu Qingjie had, all he could actually do was wait for his father to come back. This may be another golden finger given by the system to the female supporting role. At the beginning of the story, Yu Qingjie, the original heroine, was not in Yanzhou at home. She followed her father to work in Guangling County, Qingzhou, thousands of miles away, and her cousin Yu Qingjie. It was through this gap that the first pot of gold in life was made. Things like gold fingers are really infuriating. Yu Qingjie is in this angry and helpless mood now, she is not in front of her, it is useless to say or do anything. And depending on the situation, she probably won't leave Qingzhou and return to her hometown within a year or so, so she can only watch helplessly as the female supporting role seizes the opportunity and takes advantage of the right time and place. And Yu Qingjia's poisoning of her obviously happened after she returned to Yanzhou, so Yu Qingjia thought that maybe she could get a glimpse of it from the letters sent from her ancestral house. However, Yu Qingjia was going to be disappointed. Bai Ji said, "There is no letter in this period of time, but Le Jun sent one half a month ago. Do you want to read it, miss?" It was half a month ago, Yu Qingjia sighed and said, "That's all." She had read that letter a long time ago, and it was nothing more than Grandmother Gao, the oldest ancestor of the Yu family, scolding his father for being unfilial in a different way, and asking him to return to Yanzhou as soon as possible and follow the family's arrangement to become an official. Ever since Yu Wenjun brought Yu Qingjia to Qingzhou, such letters appeared endlessly, and they received one every few days. Because of Yu Qingjia and the system, Yu Qingjia was inexplicably anxious all day long. In the evening, Beiji came in with her head down, her expression gentle, as if she had encountered something unspeakable. Yu Qingjia felt strange and asked, "What's wrong?" "Miss, the prefect is back." Yu Qingjia stood up with a groan, straightened her sleeves and was about to go out. "This is a good thing, why are you acting dejected?" Bai Ji buried her head deeply, and her voice was inaudible. "The prefect also brought back a beautiful girl." Yu Qingjia was stunned on the spot. Yu Qingjia clearly remembered that when A Niang was dying and seriously ill after being tortured by the big house in Laojun, his father knelt down in front of the couch with a face of guilt, held A Niang's hand and said sorry for their mother and daughter. Yu Shi and Yu Wenjun are childhood sweethearts. She knows that he also has a lot of helplessness. She doesn't blame him, but Yu Shi only worries about her only daughter, Yu Qingjia. Yu Wenjun knew that if it wasn't for him, the Yu family would never have withered early in the past 2 decades. He held his wife's hand tightly and solemnly swore, "Azi, I'm sorry for you, and I'm even more sorry for Jiajia. Redeem my sins, I will never remarry in the future, let alone let other women bully Jiajia." Although this is very selfish, Yu's heart is still greatly relieved. She is also a woman, and of course she knows how much influence it will have on Yu Qingjia, a daughter who has not left the court, if her stepmother comes in the future. After hearing Yu Wenjun's promise not to continue marrying and not taking concubines, Mrs. Yu was finally relieved and closed her eyes with a smile. But it's only been less than 4 years, and father is going to take a concubine? Yu Qingjia's emotions that had been pent up for a day suddenly exploded. She raised her face, her beautiful eyes were extremely cold. As a daughter, it is very impolite to meddle in her father's private affairs, but this is her father's promise to her mother, and it has always been a sacred and solid symbol of love in Yu Qingjia's heart. She wants to see what kind of vixen her father is going to marry. The wheels of the cart were slowly pressing on the blue stone road. It had just rained last night, and the road was covered with puddles of various sizes. The carriage rolled over and made a creaking sound. It was getting late now, and there were not many pedestrians on the street, but the crowd saw the eunuch's convoy approaching from a distance, and they kept out of the way. Yu Wenjun walked to the government office unimpeded all the way. It is also because there are few people, so no one is surprised. Yu Wenjun, the majestic eunuch, why did he go back to his mansion through the side door? When Yu Wenjun saw the courtyard wall, his expression became serious again. He reined in his horse and stopped in front of the side door, looking secretly at the way he came. After the carriage in the middle of the team entered, he got off his horse and walked slowly into the mansion. When they finally got home, many people had relaxed expressions on their faces. Yu Wenjun was wearing a wide-sleeved loose coat, with his hands behind his back, and he was dressed in style when he paced around, and his gestures and movements were full of celebrity demeanor. However, when he walked to the side of the carriage, with his own slow pace, he lowered his voice and said to the people inside, "This is it, I have wronged you, my lord. The car curtain was still quiet, almost making one suspect that there was no one inside. After a while, a cold and indifferent voice came from inside, "Prefect Yu is very polite, and I will bother you a lot in the future, so don't be so polite." The voice was cold and depressing, and for a moment it was impossible to tell the difference between male and female. Yu Wenjun understood, the person inside said it politely, but it was actually reminding him that he can no longer be called son. Thinking of this, Yu Wenjun sighed quietly. 2 reign titles were changed this year. At the beginning of the year, Emperor Wudi of the Ming dynasty died of illness. King Chongshan took control of the government and became emperor under the of his party members. The first emperor Minggu was the founding emperor. He was brilliant and powerful in the early days, and fought in the south and the north. However, after 3 years of becoming emperor, he inevitably contracted the common diseases of emperors, becoming hedonistic, extravagant, and suspicious. The former prince judged Ming Wudi's indiscriminate murder in private, but he was reported and stabbed to the imperial court. King Chongshan is the same mother and younger brother of the crown prince. He took the opportunity to unite with his close ministers to falsely accuse the crown prince of complaining to the emperor for a long time. Sure enough, the word "qi" written by the prince himself was found. Only the emperor can write an imperial edict. Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty abolished the prince's position in the East Palace, and ordered people to kill all the prince's children. The East Palace, which symbolized the crown prince, was filled with blood within a day. Only the crown prince's youngest son, Lanja King Murongyan, who was only 13 years old, happened to be hunting outside the palace that day and was not affected by the killing. After the prince's subordinates heard these things, they sent a letter to King Lanja regardless of life and death, and risked their lives to send Murongyan out of the capital and hid it among the people. King Lanja is beautiful, good at archery, and quick in thinking. He is the most beloved grandson of Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty. When Murongyan was 10 years old, Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty pointed at him in front of all his officials and said, "This son is the most like me." If it were ordinary people, this sentence was nothing more than to show the elder's love for his grandson, but in the emperor's family, this sentence is very meaningful. After King Lanja disappeared, King Chongshan once proposed to arrest him and bring him to justice, but Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty had no choice but to divert him. The matter of Murongyan's disappearance was put on hold. Everyone in Ye City knew that the youngest son of the abandoned prince was still alive, and some people wanted to find him out, but in the final analysis, no one dared to put it on the table. Since last summer, Emperor Mingwu's health has taken a turn for the worse, and he soon fell ill. Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty has been indulging in sensuality and feasting for a long time in the past few years. It is not surprising that he can't stand it. King Chongshan took the opportunity to control the government and arbitrarily installed his party members. Although Emperor Mingwu, who had always loved power like his life, knew about it, he was helpless. I don't know if it is because people are about to die, it is easy to recall the past and yearn for family affection. In his illness, Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty missed his respectful and filial prince, and his amazingly talented grandson. In the winter of the 8th year of Zhang Wu, Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty was seriously ill and could not return. He issued an edict on the sickbed to restore Murongyan's title of King Lanja. Although his father is still a commoner, Murongyan's princely fiefdoms have all been restored to their original state. When this edict is seen by King Chongshan, it will be fine. King Changshan's jealousy and hatred grew stronger, and he set up a net in Yuchen, just waiting for Murongyan to come back. Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty knew that time was running out. Why did he take so much effort to announce to the world and restore the name of King Lanja? Is it because I want to use this to convey the news, and I want to see Murongyan again before he dies? However, Murongyan is worthy of being the seed of their Murong family, something that the whole world can understand, but Murongyan is still as cold as iron. He didn't come back, and there was no news at all. Emperor Mingwu passed away with regret, and then King Chongshan took control of the inner palace and outer court and ascended the throne as emperor. After he ascended the throne, the first thing he did was to change his Lao Tzu's year name, and then he ordered that Mirongyan be searched and arrested throughout the country. A reward of 100 gold was offered to anyone who reported the news, and 1,000 households would be awarded to those who personally caught him. The entire Qi dynasty was boiling because of this. Yu Wenjun sighed with emotion as if he was afraid. At the end of last year, when they heard the imperial edict, it wasn't that they had never argued. Some people claim that King Lanja is the only bloodline of the prince, and it is not suitable to take risks. However, more people feel that the hearts of parents in the world are pitiful. Emperor Mingyu's heart of boxing and thinking about his son is moved. Maybe Mirongyan should show up and take advantage of Emperor Mingyu's guilt to overthrow Chong. The king of the mountain rehabilitated the prince. The two groups of people were arguing endlessly, but Mirongyan, the person involved, remained calm from the beginning to the end, did not reply, ignored it. Yu Wenjun smiled wryly. Now it seems that Mirongyan was right. As expected of a member of the royal family, his blood is cold by nature. He only turned 15 years old this autumn, and he is actually more rational and calm than adults like them. Thanks to Mirongyan's uncle, the current emperor, the whole world is now under the order of King Lanja. The edict to restore Mirongyan's name was issued by the first emperor himself. If the emperor does not want to overthrow it openly, he will force Mirongyan to come out in a different way, so as to avoid future troubles forever. In this way, the security of the original hiding place is greatly reduced. Of course, you can hide if you want to hide, just stay behind closed doors. But Mirongyan has a special status, and he can't stop taking courses such as literature, history, art of war, emperor's mind, etc. If there are people coming and going every day, I'm afraid it will attract suspicion sooner or later. They discussed secretly for a long time among the prince's subjects who were hiding underground, and decided to take the risk of disguising Mirongyan as a woman and sending her to Guangling County in the name of concubine Ji. Yu Wenjun's acquaintances are varied and wide, and he often comes and goes in and out of his mansion, which will not arouse any suspicion. Moreover, the geographical location of Guangling County is just right. It is remote and unnoticed, but it is not far from important towns such as Yuchen. The only imperfect link in this plan is probably Mirongyan's need to dress up as a woman, and the huge risk Yu Wenjun has to take. Everyone knew that this plan was to dance on the tip of the knife. If something happened and Yu Wenjun's family died, there would be many people involved. But Yu Wenjun has extremely lofty political ideals. King Chongshan is tyrannical, favors traitors, and their only hope in the Qi dynasty lies in the son of the deposed prince. A sage said that he would die when he heard the truth, and Yu Wenjun was not as good as a sage, but he would give up his body for the righteousness of the world, and he, Yu Wenjun, was willing to give it a try. Yu Wenjun left home this time to divert the matter of Mirongyan, and this matter was urgent, so he could only cruelly throw his daughter in the mansion. When they were parting from the others, they had already agreed on a secret code, and after a few days after the storm subsided, Yu Wenjun, in the name of recruiting his daughter a wife, successively brought Mirongyan's civil and military masters into the prefect's mansion. Yu Wenjun thought back and forth several times about what he was going to do next, and when he finally finished deliberating, he saw his precious daughter coming out of the backyard angrily. Yu Qingjia's lips were slightly pouted, and there seemed to be a bright light in her eyes. The whole person was finished with anger, shining brightly. Men are always slow to think about their daughters. Yu Wenjun didn't feel anything wrong, but asked with a sincere smile, "Jia, why did you come out? What did you have for lunch today? Did you have dinner?" Yu Qingjia saluted Yu Wenjun first, rolled his eyes, and seemed to fall behind Yu Wenjun inadvertently. "Father, I heard that you brought a beautiful girl back." When Yu Wenjun heard this title, he was shocked. The one who hates others to mention his appearance the most, when he was in Yuchen, a high-ranking official's son joked, "Lanja King Mirongyan, the appearance is really a woman, and she is ashamed. It's not as good as your good looks. Murong Yan heard from the side, without saying a word, he directly drew his bow and arrow, and went towards the person who spoke. The few people were laughing, they saw Murong Yan leading the bow, they thought it was a joke, but Murong Yan was serious and wanted to shoot them dead. They dodged in panic, but Murong Yan made another arrow after dodging an arrow, his movements were not rushed, it could be called elegant. In the end, if it wasn't for the envoys around Emperor Mingwu to plead for mercy, I'm afraid someone would die that day. Yu Wenjun wanted to remind his daughter, but on second thought, that's right, now Murong Yan is indeed a woman in name, and Yu Qingjie called him beautiful girl without reproach. Yu Wenjun could only remind him vaguely, Jia, this is your elder, you have to be respectful and don't use such frivolous titles. Yu Qingjie's eyebrows twitched unexpectedly. She has always firmly believed that there is love between her father and mother. Although this relationship did not resist the family's destruction in the end, being handsome does not affect its original beauty. The love between parents supported all Yu Qingjie's fantasies about her future husband when she was a girl. Her ideal husband is a son who is as upright, open-minded, and clean as his father. But now, the father she regarded as a role model not only brought back a concubine in a big way, but also showed displeasure, reminding herself not to insult her with concubine and other frivolous words, but to treat her respectfully and treat her like a mother. Yu Qingjie pursed her lips and tried her best to restrain herself, but she still couldn't help the evil fire in her heart. Yu Qingjie said, "Father, where is this lady? When we meet for the first time, doesn't she come out to say hello?" Yu Wenjun was taken aback again when he suddenly heard that King Lanja was called lady. He told himself to try to get used to it, but on the other hand he was still worried. In a few years, if he dared to speak to King Lanja like this, he would be beaten to death. Yu Wenjun tried his best to choose his words carefully. Jia, the horses are exhausted, so we have to arrange for this distinguished guest to rest first. As for the ceremony, let's wait until another day. This is too arrogant, right? As a concubine, she was already standing in the hall in person. Any concubine who had just entered the house would dare not come to see her right away, but arrogantly said that she was tired today, so let's wait another day for the ceremony. Even if Yu Qingjie lost her mother, she would not tolerate such bullying. Father! Yu Qingjie yelled heavily, even though this new lady is half my senior in terms of seniority, she is still different from her concubine after all. I came here in person, but did she avoid seeing her? Jia! Yu Wenjun hurriedly shouted, and was about to take his silly girl back, when he heard a low and cold voice from outside the door and window, "No need." The eyes of the whole room turned slowly, through the 5 orchid and bamboo folding screens, the crane incense burner with a slender neck, and the blue curtains fluttering gently in the evening wind, a thin and slender figure was standing there. As soon as Yu Qingjie raised his head, he met the other party's eyes. Although Yu Qingjie is not ignorant of the heights of heaven and earth, she also knows that her face is very beautiful, and she is almost invincible. But at this moment Yu Qingjie was not sure. The author has something to say, male and female can't tell the difference, cruel, ruthless, possessive, strong ancestral paranoia, genetically beautiful boy vs landlord's silly daughter. The visitor did not wear a skirt, but a husuit that was considered barbaric and vulgar by the etiquette. The man was dressed in a neat white beard jacket with narrow sleeves and a collar, and a red leather belt around his waist, with a metal pendant on the leather belt, hanging long over his knees. In fact, this person's shoulders are a bit wide for a woman, but her waistline is smooth and thin, and her legs are incredibly slender under the husuit trousers. Overall, she looks beautiful and appropriate, as if everything should be like this. The most terrible thing is this person's face, which is simply the favorite of nature, a masterpiece of heaven. As a woman, her nose is high and straight and delicate. The eyes are also thick and stunning, but the lines are sharp everywhere, and the lips are also thin and delicate, and they are extremely aggressive. When they look at each other, it makes the heart beat faster. Like all brightly colored creatures in nature, beautiful, but dangerous. Yu Qingjie stared at the other party, forgetting how to react for a while. The other party was also looking at her, parted her thin lips lightly, and said unhurriedly, "Miss Yu has a destiny, so don't dare to refuse." Yu Qingjie managed to regain her composure, turned her head to look at Yu Wenjun. Her words were a little awkward. She was brought back by you. Yu Qingjie didn't know how to address this person for a while. After seeing the real person, she was inexplicably afraid to call her concubine Ji, but she couldn't call her Xiaoniang. Yu Qingjie was tangled, and Yu Wenjun was also a little troubled. He really hadn't noticed what Mirong Yan's nickname was when he couldn't mention Wang Ju. On weekdays, when they called Mirong Yan, they naturally called him young master. A very small number of courtiers who were close relatives and relatives could call him Lang Jun, and they didn't even think about calling him by his first name. Mirong Yan doesn't need a title, because he won't use it at all. The scene was stalemate for a while, but Mirong Yan's expression remained unchanged, and he said lightly, "Call me Jing Huan." "Ah." Yu Qingjie felt that the name was strange. "Your surname is Jing." This surname was not common in the northern dynasties. Yu Qingjie recited it twice silently in her heart, always feeling weird. She muttered to herself, "Sounds a bit like a man." Yu Wenjun glanced at Mirong Yan quickly. Mirong Yan was only 13 years old when the East Palace incident happened. Although he had already been crowned king, he had no words. Jing Huan Kongmu is of the same seniority as their generation, and most of these words are given to him by Mirong Yan. Now he uses it as a name to fool his daughter, but it is reluctant. The name of the concubine Ji brought back was unknown, which was obviously unreasonable. It would be great if Yu Qingjie had no suspicions, but seeing her daughter being fooled so easily made Yu Wenjun feel an indescribable sense of complexity. Yu Wenjun didn't want to stay on this topic, so he quickly broke the silence and said, "Since everyone is here, let's order the kitchen to prepare meals. Jing Huan has been tired all day, so he can go back to his room to rest after eating." Yu Qingjie called out quietly, "Father! What's wrong?" At that moment, Yu Qingjie's mind was filled with words such as makes people faint, and if there is a stepmother, there will be a stepfather. She shook her head at Yu Wenjun, and then when her father ordered the servants, she turned her head and glared at Mirong unkindly. Same as the Eves. She really didn't expect that the one who came was a vixen with extraordinary beauty. Mirong Yan caught Yu Qingjie's actions easily. There was no movement in his pupils, and he didn't even bother to give her a look. Seeing such a statement, Yu Qingjie was undoubtedly even more angry. It was arrogant and arrogant. Yu Qingjie had seen concubines of his uncles and brothers in the ancestral house. Some concubines were favored, so they would inevitably boss around and look at people with their nostrils, but it was rare to see such arrogant Cheng Jinghuan. Yu Qingjie thought, her father has kept himself clean for so many years, and his backyard has always been clean. Could it be that he is prone to eruption after being suppressed for a long time, and the first time his father led someone back, is he such a difficult role? The attendant quickly brought up the food table. At this time, he followed the courtesy of Johan, and he still ate separately. The dishes are served on plates and placed on each person's dining table. Yu Qingjie walked to the dining hall, and suddenly found that her food table had been removed, and two maids were carrying a new food table and put it on her original place. Yu Qingjie couldn't believe it. "Father! Jing Huan is your elder, so naturally you should respect him." Yu Wenjun waved to Yu Qingjie, motioning her to sit on the other side. "You can sit down. You must know that the status of concubines is very low now, not to mention reselling them as gifts, and even the sons and daughters of concubines have no status. It was not uncommon for a wife to call a concubine like a maid, and a concubine to be a slave. This situation was not uncommon in the northern dynasties. Now a concubine Ji not only eats in the same room with the master's family, but also has a higher position in the dining table than Yu Qingjie, the daughter of the first wife, which is simply insulting. Yu Qingjie didn't expect that one day her father would do such things like pampering his concubine and destroying his wife, and seducing his wits out of his wits. Yu Qingjie had always been regarded as a treasure by her father, but now that she suddenly received such contempt, she was angry with her father for what she did for her mother, and at the same time, her hostility towards the vixen who penetrated her family reached its peak. Yu Qingjie looked at Jing Huan who was standing opposite her. She thought that Jing Huan would decline in fear and sincerity. But no, this strikingly beautiful woman named Jing Huan didn't say anything, and calmly sat down behind the case. Very well, Yu Qingjie was so angry that she gradually calmed down. With Yu Qingjie and the system on the outside, and a vixen who is spoiled and arrogant on the inside, it seems that her life in the future will be very lively. Yu Qingjie gritted her teeth during this meal. She suddenly felt sad when she thought of her mother who had passed away only 4 years ago. At this time, it was common practice to have prostitutes, and scholar bureaucrats were proud of fighting prostitutes and fighting for wealth. She thought her father was different from other men, but now it seemed that men in the world were all black. In fact, my mother has passed away for 4 years, and my father is in his prime. Even for future considerations, he cannot be left alone to take care of him. Yu Qingjie knew that she should be happy for her father, but she couldn't be happy now no matter what. Yu Qingjie secretly spurned herself, she was simply too selfish. Yu Qingjie is just 14 years old this year. She lost her mother when she was young, and she has always respected her father. Now a person around her age suddenly appeared to compete for her father. Of course, Yu Qingjie immediately raised the alarm, wanting to compete for his father's attention. After all, she was just a 14-year-old girl. There is no rebirth, no time travel, her life is blooming in the purest cardamom years. Because at home, it is not so strict to eat and sleep without talking. Yu Qingjie was full, but her father did not put down his chopsticks, so she could not leave the table, so she talked to her father one after another. "Father, why have you been away for so long this visit?" Yu Wenjun said vaguely, "The old friend reunited, and I was deeply moved, so I stayed for a few more days." Yu Qingjie was thoughtful, and she glanced at Murong Yan lightly. From this point of view, this beauty was gifted by others during the party. Giving concubines was very common in the northern dynasties. The gentry didn't think there was anything wrong with giving their women to others, but it was considered good talk. This shows how low the concubine's status is. When they were in the ancestral home of the Yu family, Da Feng and Yu Qingjie always used concubines to demean Yu Qingjie's mother and daughter. However, when she was replaced by a real concubine, she became extremely flamboyant. Yu Qingjie's current mood is both defensive and curious, as if a little beast whose territory has been invaded is trying to demonstrate to the invaders with its small milk teeth. Yu Qingjie continued to ask, "Father, is this journey safe and sound? I heard from the servants who went out of the house that the inspections on the road have been very strict these days, and many checkpoints have been set up when going out of the city and entering the city. The food is not fresh." The imperial court suddenly tightened the policy, and it was obvious to whom. Fortunately, Guangling is located in a remote place, Yu Wenjun is the prefect, and Murong Yan has disguised himself as a woman, so he passed the customs smoothly. Yu Wenjun made a serious face, and said to Yu Qingjie, "Jia, it's not peaceful outside these few days, you can't leave the house any longer." Yu Qingjie responded obediently. Although she stayed in a small remote county far away from the political center, she had heard rumors about the current Holy Majesty. Hearing that he was moody and indiscriminately killed innocent people, people in Yuchen are now panicked and closed their doors during the day. Since the Chinese New Year, other counties have also been affected by the matter of King Lanja. Human life is the least valuable in troubled times, how could Yu Qingjie go out at such a time? However, Yu Wenjun seemed to be aroused by indignation, couldn't help but put down his chopsticks, and sighed, "The world is going down, where is Miazi?" When the first emperor was around, he believed in slander and killed his subjects at every turn, but now he treats human life like nothing. "I heard that Beigong often goes to the folk for entertainment, but if something goes wrong, it will be chopped down, and if it sees a beautiful woman, it will be plundered back to the palace. What's more, the wives and daughters of important officials in the court will not be spared. Zikan is dim, Tabe plunders the master, the country there will be no country." There were no outsiders in the dining room, and the only few servants were trusted domestic slaves, so Yu Wenjun dared to express his feelings. Yu Qingjie knew that the royal family was absurd, but she didn't expect the absurdity to be like this. Now this emperor, the former Chongshan king, actually went to the people from time to time, playing and plundering, killing the people on the street if there was a slight dislike. Yu Qingjie couldn't help asking, did he do it himself? Yu Wenjun nodded heavily. Now these few emperors don't know what's wrong, they love to see blood. The first emperor would go crazy at every turn, and they would talk about court affairs, but the next second they might draw out their swords and chase the ministers to slash. The prime minister had no choice but to replace the guards in the palace with prisoners on death row. When the first emperor suddenly became interested, he played killing games with the emperor, and promised to release the prisoners without charge as long as they lived for 3 months. Thanks to the prime minister's method, the ministers of the DPRK and China were able to save their lives. The abolished prince had clearly expressed his dissatisfaction with the late emperor's behavior, and everyone has seen what happened to the prince later. Unexpectedly, after changing to the new emperor, things got even worse. He didn't like to play in the palace, but liked to go to the folk to have fun. No wonder Yu Wenjun is worried. In the long run, which country can sustain it? Even the foundation laid by the gods cannot withstand such consumption. When Yu Wenjun explained to Yu Qingjie in a low voice, Mirong Yan was eating slowly beside him, his movements were elegant and his expression was dignified. No matter what the purpose of Yu Wenjun's words in front of him was, Mirong Yan remained unmoved, as if he was completely listening to the stories of unrelated people. After hearing this, Yu Qingjie's hair stood on end, she couldn't help hugging her trembling arm, and muttered inadvertently, "It's been like this for generations, is there a disease in their blood?" Of course, Yu Wenjun deliberately said these words to hint and remind Mirong Yan, but when he heard his daughter's words, Yu Wenjun suddenly broke out in a cold sweat due to the late spring weather. He quickly glanced at Mirong Yan, then turned to look at Yu Qingjie seriously, "Jia, don't talk nonsense." Yu Qingjie was taken aback. She really thought that the royal family must have inherited diseases from their ancestors. How can normal people like to kill and get excited when they see blood? But she didn't expect her father's reaction to be so strong. She stared blankly at her father, unable to react for a while Yu Wenjun was fidgeting, and his eyes kept wandering between the 2 food tables on the left and right. Yu Wenjun is the master and the chief. He sits at the top of the center, and there are 2 desks on the left and right sides. Respecting the right side, Yu Qingjie used to sit directly on the right side of her father, but now there is an extra person, and she was moved to the left, which caused Yu Qingjie and Mirong Yan to sit face to face, and they could see each other when they looked up to each other. Now Yu Wenjun's eyes were moving back and forth between the 2 desks, his face was stiff, as if he wanted to say something but dared not say it. Mirong Yan finally put down the chopsticks, raised her head and glanced in Yu Qingjie's direction with a half-smile. He turned his head to meet Yu Wenjun's gaze, and Mirong Yan smiled clearly at Yu Wenjun's eyes that were obviously full of panic, worry and fear. This smile seemed to be icy sharp, and Yu Wenjun's heart went cold when he saw it. Looking at Mirong Yan's expression, he obviously understood what Yu Wenjun was worried about, and he also understood that what Yu Qingjie said just now was disrespectful to the entire royal family and even the ancestors. The people of Mirong's family hold grudges the most. Yu Wenjun feels uneasy, those who don't know are innocent, not to mention that Jia is just a little girl who hasn't reached the age of Ji, the majestic King Lanja, shouldn't care about a little girl, right? Probably not. Yu Wenjun thought of the brilliant record that Mirongyan had made, and he was not sure. Yu Qingjie found that no one was talking in the hall. She looked around curiously, and asked, "Father, what are you talking about?" Yu Wenjun withdrew his gaze, feeling mixed feelings in his heart, but Mirongyan cleaned his hands in the copper plate next to him, and slowly wiped off the water stains on his fingers. Partition walls have ears, so don't say such things in the future. Yu Qingjie heard her father let out a long sigh of relief from a long distance away. She obviously didn't understand why her father was nervous, and asked strangely, "There are no outsiders here, and the servant is also an old slave in the family. Why can't you say it?" Before the deposed prince was accused, he also thought so. Mirongyan stood up first, Sukza nodded his chin at the two of them, and then walked out. "I'm going back to rest, you can do whatever you want." Yu Qingjie subconsciously nodded in response, and when the person walked away, she suddenly realized, no, she is a young lady and Jing Huan is just a concubine Ji, why should he give orders? Yu Qingjie couldn't help but glance at Mirongyan's back. Yu Wenjun stroked his beard and looked at Yu Qingjie deeply. "My silly daughter." Yu Qingjie quit immediately. "Father, what happened to you today, not only favoring Jing Huan everywhere, but now you call me stupid?" "Forget it." Yu Wenjun sighed, stood up and stroked his daughter's fluffy hair. "Stupid people are lucky, go back and rest." After Yu Qingjie withdrew from the dining hall, she immediately walked across the corridor with her skirt in hand. When she finally saw the person in front, she supported the pillar and shouted out of breath, "Stop!" Mirongyan seemed to stop unexpectedly, and turned to see Yu Qingjie, and continued walking forward without even looking at her. Yu Qingjie can guarantee that she will definitely see the disdain in that vixen's eyes. She can't see the law, she can't see the law. Yu Qingjie didn't care to catch her breath, and immediately crossed the corridor and blocked Mirongyan, raising her head and staring at him awe-inspiringly. Yu Qingjie didn't expect that she would need to look up. Yu Qingjie followed the example of her aunt, and came to give power to the restless concubine Ji. Among the people she knew were some powerful ladies. Although they were only daughters, they took care of their father's concubines properly, and held the power of life and death in the entire back house. In the past, there was only Yu Qingjie in the prefect's mansion, so of course it didn't matter if the housekeeper Chuan and others were indifferent, but now that the back house is invaded by foreign enemies, Yu Qingjie immediately decided not to be as lazy as before. Completely suppressed. No matter how much you are favored, even a dragon has to be coiled in her territory. In Yu Qingjie's original plan, she would stand gracefully in front of Mirongyan with lotus steps, lightly and murderously say some words of kindness and power, destroy the prestige of the vixen, and make him kneel on the ground to admit his mistakes again and again. "I dare not offend myself again." But as soon as Yu Qingjie went out, she found that Mirongyan had disappeared. She chased him all the way under the instructions of the maid, and finally caught up with him. Yu Qingjie didn't exercise regularly, and this trip really cost her half her life. Now her chest is heaving up and down, and she can't stop panting. Because of the uneven breath and the need to look up at people, Yu Qingjie lost half of her momentum before she could speak. Yu Qingjie was very dissatisfied with her appearance. She secretly slandered that this vixen was walking too fast. "Are you the concubine Ji brought back by my father?" Such casual rhetorical questions are the most intimidating, leisurely and determined, and only then can they show the mistress demeanor. Well, although Yu Qingjie is not the mistress yet, the purpose is the same. But Yu Qingjie obviously forgot that when the main room received concubines in the past, they would sit and kneel one by one, but now she has to look up at people. In this way, the threat effect may be compromised, but her eyes are round and hooked, looking furry and cute, the effect must be compromised. Mirongyan glanced coldly with lowered eyes, walked around Yu Qingjie and walked forward. Yu Qingjie was taken aback for a moment. What's going on? Why is the vixen not frightened? Yu Qingjie hurriedly turned around, ran quickly and chased after her. Her eyes widened. There is a difference between a concubine and a concubine. Is this how you treat the lady of the main family? As if Mirongyan didn't see her, she continued to walk forward. Yu Qingjie had to take 2 steps back, trying to maintain her momentum. I am a legitimate daughter, and my aunt is also the wife of my father's childhood sweetheart. Even if aunt, now that you are gone, there's no chance for you to make waves in Yu's house. If you live in peace, I can keep you safe, otherwise, I won't be polite to you. Mirongyan looked down at the person in front of him, wondering for the first time how could there be such a stupid person in the world. He moved his body, but was blocked by Yu Qingjie again. Did you hear that? Mirongyan couldn't bear it anymore, and put a finger on Yu Qingjie's shoulder, pushing her away. Hey, you! Yu Qingjie was pushed away before she had time to react. Her center of gravity was unstable, and she had to reach out to support the railing to stabilize her figure, but the culprit of all this showed no sign of repentance, as if she had finally cleared her own path. He pursed his lips, but he didn't even think about it. Walked back. Yu Qingjie stared at the opponent's back in astonishment, almost staring a hole. She lifted her skirt and chased after 2 steps, and shouted at Mirongyan's back, "Did you hear that? I kindly remind you that if you do this again, I will not be polite to you." Even when the girl said threatening words, she didn't have any strength, and when she said it, the end of her voice was still spinning. Mirongyan said in his heart that you are welcome, so it depends on you? He sneered in his heart, and didn't even bother to give Yu Qingjie his eyes. Bai Ji followed Yu Qingjie and witnessed the whole process of her young lady from being chased to being ignored and then being pushed away. Bai Ji felt a little embarrassed and called out cautiously, "Miss." She actually. Yu Qingjie was furious, and finally stamped her feet angrily, "I'm not done with her." Bai Ji lifted the curtain, saw the expressions of the people outside, and was stunned for a moment. "Yo, what's the matter, miss? Who messed with you?" Bai Ji winked at Bai Ji, "Don't talk about it, the young lady is worrying now." Bai Ji moved out of the way, and when Yu Qingjie walked inside, she secretly asked Bai Ji with her mouth, "What's wrong?" "It's not because of the one brought back by the prefect. She also doesn't know what to do. A playful concubine, how dare she show her face to the young lady?" Just now when the prefect came back, Bai Ji didn't go out with Yu Qingjie, but stayed indoors, so she only knew that there was an additional concubine in Yu's mansion, but she didn't know who Miji was. But looking at Yu Qingjie's face now, I'm afraid the person who came here is not a good person. Bai Ji took care of Yu Qingjie and grew up. She was almost like an older sister. Except for her biological mother, Yu Shi, Bai Ji was the closest to Yu Qingjie. Bai Ji brought a candlestick to Yu Qingjie, and knelt down behind Yu Qingjie lightly. "Miss, are you still worrying about the front yard?" "No. How is she worth it?" Bai Ji didn't light it, but lit the candle wick, and said slowly, "Miss, don't be angry, you and her are worthless. You are the treasure in the hands of the eunuch, and the people in the old house don't care about you." "Agree," they insisted on bringing you to Qingzhou? "The elders are like this, let alone a concubine's room." Seeing that Yu Qingjie was silent, Bai Ji deliberately diverted her attention, and pretended to be cheerful and said, "Miss, didn't you ask for letters during the day? It just so happened that after you finished asking today, a letter from Yanzhou came." "Oh!" Yu Qingjie cheered up, and said quickly, "Show me quickly." The letter from the ancestral house is logically to ask Yu Wenjun to pass the purpose first, but he has always cherished his daughter, so he doesn't care about these small transgressions. Yu Qingjie quickly opened the letter, looking at 10 lines, but when she saw the end, her expression became silent. Bai Ji saw that Yu Qingjie's expression was wrong, and asked with concern, "What's wrong?" Yu Qingjie casually put 2 pages of paper on the table, and said in a calm tone, "They urged my father to go back to Yanzhou again." The old gentleman reprimanded his father for insisting on going his own way, and taking up a job in Qingzhou would only waste time and delay his official career. The old gentleman also said that if father wakes up in time, go back to Yanzhou now, and still be able to catch up with the official position she arranged for her father. Bai Ji was also silent for a moment. The ancestors of the Yu family had known for a long time that they disagreed with Yu Wenjun's release, but they did not expect that old Master Yu's prejudice against Qingzhou had become so bad. Yu Qingjie instinctively felt that something was wrong. The Yu family had lived in Yanzhou for generations, and it was a common practice for the great-grandmother to look down on other places. But they have been in Qingzhou for 2 years. Usually, although old Master Yu was dissatisfied, his tone was still polite. In just a few days, why did he suddenly take a turn for the worse, to the point where he angrily scolded his father in a letter? Yu Qingjie immediately thought of Yu Qingjie. This undoubtedly hit her hard again. Those dreams were all real. Counting the time of the correspondence, I am afraid that Yu Qingjie's dream and Yu Qingjie's rebirth did not happen at the same time, and the time must be pushed forward by at least 1 or 2 months. This makes sense. After Yu Qingjie was reborn, she signed a contract with the system, and the system helped her deal with Yu Qingjie, and put it into practice within these 2 months. But Yu Qingjie doesn't believe that there is a free lunch in the world, so why does the system help Yu Qingjie? What does the system want from Yu Qingjie? Yu Qingjie didn't know. I'm afraid Yu Qingjie herself has never thought about this question. Now, Yu Qingjie, or the system's countermeasures, have taken effect. As expected, Mr. Yu's opinion of Yu Qingjie has changed a lot, and under Yu Qingjie's subtle instigation, he is extremely dissatisfied with Yu Qingjie's father and daughter who are far away in Qingzhou. Yu Qingjie's eyebrows were obviously lowered when he thought of the house that could not be seen at a glance, those lifeless years. Bai Ji also thought of the domineering eldest son of the old Yejun in the old house. She has stayed by Yu Qingjie's side for many years, and of course Bai Ji remembers the life of Miss Six's mother and daughter in the ancestral house. Yu Wenjun's parents are Wengu of the second household, but Yu Wenjun himself is the heir of both the first household and the second household. Among them, there is a long reason. Old Lord Yu is the mistress of the Yu family, and she has 2 sons. The eldest son is from the lineage of Dafang Yufu, and the second son is Yu Wenjun's father, Yu Yan. Brothers Yu Fu and Yu Yan each have a son. The old gentleman has always favored the eldest son and grandson. Although he is dissatisfied with Yu Wenjun, the second family grandson who doesn't like official career and doesn't do business, he turns a blind eye and lets him go up. But who would have known that 10 years ago, the young only son of the big family suddenly died unexpectedly? He was not married when he died, and he didn't even have a left behind. After the grief, Le Jun panicked, fearing that the eldest son would lose his family, so he wanted to adopt a child from another branch to the eldest family, and the most suitable age for the same root and same origin was of course Yu Wenjun of the second wife. However, Yu Wenjun is also the only son in Yu Yan's family. If he is adopted by the elder family, the second family will be extinct. With no other choice, he had no choice but to hold incense, that is to say, Yu Wenjun held incense for both houses, and at the same time assumed the inheritance of incense for his own family and that of his uncle's family. Since it is concurrent, it means marrying 2 wives to carry on the family line separately. Yu Wenjun was already engaged to his childhood sweetheart, Yu Shi, and he just waited for Yu Shi and Ji to get married. As a result, he was disturbed by Jianyanyi, so he could only postpone his marriage with Yu Shi, and was forced to marry Li Shi, the wife that his elder brother had set up when he was still alive. This is simply a disaster from nowhere. Yu Shi watched helplessly as Yu Wenjun married another woman, and had with Li Shi for 3 months under the auspices of the elders in the family before he could marry himself. Thus ended the feud between Li Shi and Yu Shi. Both Mrs. Yu and Mrs. Li are married wives. Although their husbands are the same, they call each other sister-in-law, sister-in-law when they meet. Yu Qingjie is the daughter of the Yu family, and Yu Qinja is the daughter of the Li family. Although they have the same father, they are cousins. Although nominally the sisters-in-law sit together, but they live under the same roof, so there is no distinction between high and low. The eldest house was in charge, and if it wasn't for the accidental death of the only son of the eldest house, Yu Wenjun might not be the head of the house. Therefore, the Longhouse has always been aloof, thinking that Yu Wenjun's ability to inherit the incense of the Longhouse is entirely due to their kindness. However, Yu Shi and Yu Wenjun were childhood sweethearts, and Li Shi interfered in their own marriage. In terms of time and reason, Li Shi was the third party. But who made the old and young orderly? Yu Wenjun had to marry Li first. Mrs. Li passed through the door before Mrs. Yu, and when facing Mrs. Yu, he was full of superiority, so he naturally looked down on Mrs. Yu. Mrs. Li didn't say anything, but she regarded Mrs. Yu as a concubine in her heart. The mother's attitude spread to her daughter. Yu Qinja also regarded herself as the eldest daughter of the first wife since she was a child, belittling Yu Qingjie as a concubine inside and out. The status of concubines and concubines is very low. What Li Shi and Yu Qinja said was by no means an inadvertent mistake, they were deliberately sarcastic. But who made the old man of the Yu family prefer the eldest house? The old man Yu couldn't understand Yu Wenjun's solitary style, but he had a strong desire to control, even intervening in the family affairs of his children and grandchildren. Yu Wenjun was not happy when he was forced to marry Mrs. Li, and even lost interest in his original eldest sister-in-law after marriage. He spent most of the day with his real wife, Mrs. Yu, and stayed in Mrs. Yu's room at night. Inside. How could Mrs. Li be willing to do this kind of thing? Mr. Yu also prefers the eldest house. He deliberately kept Mrs. Yu in front of him every day, and even summoned Mrs. Yu to serve the sick, and forced Yu Wenjun to spend the night at Mrs. Li's place in various ways. The years that Yu Qingjie and his mother lived in the old house were not really good. Under such training, Mrs. Yu left early before she was 30. When Mrs. Yu passed away, Yu Qingjie was only 10 years old. Yu Wenjun lost his beloved wife, and felt pain and guilt in his heart. At the same time, he felt a strong anger and disgust towards Mr. Yu and Mrs. Li. After the funeral of his wife, Yu Wenjun immediately contacted his friends to take a job in another county. After nearly a year of asking his friends to find vacancies and arguing with his family, Yu Wenjun left Yanzhou as he wished, and took his 12-year-old daughter to Qingzhou to take up the post. Although the conditions in Guangling were far inferior to those in his hometown, Yu Qingjie felt extremely happy. She spent 2 years of carefree life in the boudoir here. Until today, she learned that the reborn Yu Qinja had a seemingly evil system, and her father brought back an extremely arrogant concubine. Yu Wenjun took Yu Qingjie away but left Li Shi and Yu Qinja behind. In the eyes of the mother and daughter, of course Yu Wenjun was partial to the ruthless wit-eyed wolf. Yu Qinja was originally very hostile to Yu Qingjie, but now that she was reborn, with the help of the system, what she would do in her hometown made Yu Qingjie's scalp tingle just thinking about it. Now Mr. Yu is urging them to go home with stern words, presumably it is also Yu Qinja's handwriting. It's just that I don't know how many bad things Yu Qinja has said about her in front of Lejun during this period, and now Lejun's prejudice against Yu Qingjie is probably getting more intense. Yu Qingjie didn't want to deal with these troubles, she threw the letter aside, and didn't even want to read it again. Bai Ji watched Yu Qingjie's movements, and cautiously called, "Miss. I'm fine." Yu Qingjie said flatly, "I already knew how they treated me, so why would I be upset about such a trivial matter?" Bai Ji sighed, their Miss Sixth was beautiful and kind, a very caring person. Bai Ji couldn't even praise her like a jewel enough. She really couldn't understand why the old gentleman and the eldest lady had the heart to treat her so harshly. Bai Ji was full of pity, but Yu Qingjie was calm. She untied the jade ring in her hand and gently placed it on the table. Her movements were clanging, and her expression was indescribably cold and beautiful. Whether you like it or not is a personal matter. Lejun doesn't like me. I have nothing to say, but I don't owe them anything. It's fine for Lejun to be indifferent to me, but if Da Fang also looks down on me and wants to take the opportunity to insult my reputation, I can't agree anyway. Whether it is Li Shi or Yu Qingjie will not allow her to plot against her. Rebirth is not a reason to do evil, and Yu Qingjie is the heroine of the original book, so it is not the original sin. The author has something to say. Concurrently marrying two wives was a particular practice in the Qing dynasty. For example, Mei Lanfang married two wives. I haven't found relevant records in the Jin, Sui, and Tang dynasties for the time being. If you hold your hands high, just pretend that you don't see this little bug. Bai Ji didn't expect to hear such tough words from Yu Qingjie's mouth. Her eyes were surprised, her face was both surprised and happy, and she hurriedly said, "Miss, you are right to think so. You are a rightful second wife. The prefect also regards you as a jewel, and you are no worse than that of the Da Fang. She always secretly uses the concubine to run on you, just because she is jealous that you are loved by the prefect. As for the wife of the Da Fang, I don't know, being treated by the eunuch, he used some nasty means to torture his wife. Why did he intentionally make his wife housekeeper, deliberately let his wife stay in front of Lejun to serve his illness? It was not because he wanted his wife to get away, so she would have a chance to get close to the eunuch. Pooh, what a joke! Yu Qingjie saw with her own eyes how her mother Yu struggled to make ends meet in the triple mother-in-law when she was in the ancestral house. She felt sorry for her mother, but she was a junior and young, so what could Yu Qingjie do? She complained about her mother, but she also knew that her father had nothing to do. If her father had been obstinately accompanying her mother and her, he would have brought trouble on both mother and daughter. Lejun is arbitrarily arbitrary, and the uncle Li is valued by Lejun. Yu Wenjun can protect him for a while, but there are always times when he can't see it. But his mother died within a few years. Yu Wenjun was hit hard, and he took Yu Qingjie to leave the ancestral house at the cost of breaking up with the family. Yu Qingjie likes life in Qingzhou very much. Although she knows that her father will lose many opportunities for promotion in Guangling, Yu Qingjie still very selfishly hopes that her father will stay and not return to Yanzhou. But Lejun's letters are getting stricter one after another, who knows how long this stolen happiness can last. Moreover, Yu Qingjie's hidden danger cannot be left alone forever. Bai Ji saw Yu Qingjie's worry, and immediately comforted her, "Miss, don't worry, the loves you so much, he must not be willing to let you go back to the ancestral house to suffer. Besides, the also has his own views on official career, he will not ask you for a mere official position." Lejun and family surrendered. Yu Qingjie smiled lightly. Bai Ji's words were too taken for granted, but if such a beautiful fantasy can make her feel at ease, that's okay. Yu Qingjie didn't want to talk about these heavy topics anymore, how dissatisfied Mr. Yu was, and how Yu Qingjie and the system slandered her. She is not in Yanzhou now, and she probably won't go back in a short time. Don't worry about the problems in front of you. I always thought that although Auntie left early, my father was sincere to my mother. Auntie passed away and never took a concubine for 4 years. But who knows, today my father suddenly brought back a concubine. Yu Qingjie said, thinking of these things, she still gritted her teeth. She felt sorry for Yu's love, and of course she couldn't accept that there was another woman occupying the position of mother. Bai Ji was actually a little upset, and she persuaded, "Miss Yi said, this concubine Ji is very beautiful. I am afraid that most of them are gifts from colleagues and friends. The eunuch's kindness is hard to refrain, so I have to bring it back to pretend." "Don't worry, miss. How can a seductive servant last long? When the eunuch's interest passes, this concubine Ji will fall out of favor, and in the end it's not up to the miss." In fact, Yu Qingjie didn't want to do anything to Jing Huan, but getting off the horse was a must. Yu Qingjie said, "Bai Ji, you haven't seen her. She looks, not the conventional beauty, but a demon. She looks like a vixen at first glance." And she is too much, not only does she not listen to me, she even pushed me. Beiji came in to change the hot water, and couldn't help laughing when he heard Yu Qingjia's words. She knew that the young lady must be hating Jing Huan for pushing her, and she was probably already angry all the way. After Yu Qingjia was defeated in the first battle, she was still burning with extremely high enthusiasm for house fighting. She carefully arranged her troops. There must be a reason for everything. I don't have anything to do with her now. Even though she pushed me, I can't do it. Using this to sue, if I make a fuss now, I will startle the snake, and maybe I will be bitten by her, making my father think that I am making trouble for no reason. Therefore, I should sit still and wait for work. After she relaxes her vigilance and shows her feet, I will catch her in one fell swoop and send her handle to father. Of course, Bai Ji agreed, praising Yu Qingjia's strategy as perfect. The three of them, master and servant, calculated many details, and only went to bed contentedly after they thought that there was no loophole in the plan to teach the concubine a big fight from the beginning to the end. The next day, Yu Qingjia went to greet his father early in the morning. During the meal, Yu Qingjia and Yu Wenjun told about the letter from the ancestral house. Yu Wenjun also has nothing to do with his domineering grandmother, but he has already lost his wife because of this, and he will never make the same mistake again and let his daughter suffer on his behalf. With a solemn face, Yu Wenjun said, "A man should make contributions by himself. He always relies on the family. What's the reason for relying on the elders of the family to arrange official positions? I don't do such spineless things, and I don't think Qingzhou is a vulgar place. Because of the remoteness, it is more important to be down to earth and do some practical work. Jia, the father will reply to the family later, so you can live with peace of mind." Yu Qingjia breathed a sigh of relief, as long as his father didn't plan to go back. Yu Qingjia immediately beamed with joy, and didn't even care about the vixen Jing Huan sitting in front of her again. Of course, Murong Yan doesn't care about the troubles of the Yu family, and it seems that he has no memory of the fact that he pushed Yu Qingjia away, let alone expect him to feel guilty and ashamed about it. Yu Qingjia harbored her own revenge plan in her heart, gritted her teeth at the vixen's hateful attitude and endured it. At the end of the breakfast, Yu Wenjun suddenly asked coldly, "Jia, do you want to learn how to ride and shoot?" "I don't want to." Yu Qingjia refused without thinking, "I don't like archery, why should I learn it?" The veins on Yu Wenjun's forehead twitched, and he continued to hint earnestly, "Didn't you always say that you have nothing to do? Why don't you take advantage of this time to learn more classics, history and martial arts, which can be regarded as an extra skill?" Yu Qingjia thought about it, but still felt that the life of doing nothing was more comfortable. "Archery is tiring and ugly, I don't want to learn it." A chuckle came from the food table opposite, and Yu Wenjun looked at Murong Yan, who was slowly wiping his fingers with a smile on his lips, and became more embarrassed. "Jia, think about it." "Ah." Yu Qingjia was a little confused. "I don't want to, okay, then I'll learn." Yu Qingjia inexplicably added a lot of classes. She thought it would take a while to find a suitable teacher, but she didn't expect that the teacher would enter the mansion in 3 days. Nowadays, if you want to use the politics of the kings of the past, the people of the world will all stick to the tree. It is because the sage does not expect to repair the past, and the law can be permanent, and the affairs of the world are prepared for it. Looking down, is it clear? Murong Yan nodded slightly. The master was very satisfied, and immediately took out the scroll to start the next chapter. "Wait a minute, I don't understand." Yu Qingjia was stunned. She was inexplicably stuffed with a jerky preaching article, and before she could read it smoothly, she was about to start the next one. "I didn't understand an allusion earlier. What does it mean that King Yan lost his country because of his benevolence and righteousness?" The master's hand that scrolled the scroll paused. Obviously he didn't expect the mascot to ask questions. "If you explain it to her, it will definitely delay the progress," and the master's face can't help showing some hesitation. Yu Qingjie felt that since her father came back from visiting friends, things at home had become indescribably strange, and she said in amazement, "Isn't that the wife you hired for me?" Why did the teacher mostly look at the vixen who accompanied her, and ignore her at all? Murong Yan's eyes moved slightly, he glanced at the desk on the left, and finally nodded slightly. The master was shocked and surprised when he received Murong Yan's instructions. When did King Lanja care about others? He didn't even respond to the prince's orders, let alone at the critical moment of gathering strength to restore the country. It may be that they need the masked Yu Qingjie to cover up what they are doing now. In this way, it is really not easy to ignore her too much. The master tried hard to find out a reason for himself, then spread out the scroll just now, and explained again in detail from the beginning. When it was finally time to rest, Yu Qingjie couldn't help it, and quietly moved to the vixen's side, and gently slapped his arm. "Tell me the truth, do you really understand?" As soon as Yu Qingjie came over, her wide sleeves immediately covered the scroll on the desk. Murong Yan didn't want to talk to her at first, but then he thought that if he didn't answer, Yu Qingjie might have nothing to say. Murong Yan could only respond lightly, "Yes." Yu Qingjie didn't quite believe it. She was the daughter of a family and had learned to read and write since she was a child. She still found it very difficult to hear the 5 beetles. She didn't think Jing Huan, a concubine with little literary literacy, could easily keep up. "Don't try to lose face. If you tell the truth, I won't laugh at you. If you don't understand, we can tell master to speak slowly in the next class." Murong Yan looked at the completely suppressed pen and ink, couldn't bear it anymore, reached out to grab Yu Qingjie's arm, and directly removed her whole body from her desk. After Yu Qingjie experienced being pushed away with a finger, she once again experienced the great humiliation of being removed from her life. All the servants in the Yu mansion knew that the daughter of the mansion and the new concubine brought back by the were not quite right. Although the prefect ordered the two to attend classes together, as if they were companions, but no matter whether they were in or out of class, neither of them talked to the other. Yu Qingjie now finds Murong Yan extremely distasteful, and is trying every means to find a way for him every day. But this little concubine, Murong Yan, is also strange. Before dawn in the early morning, he would get up and go to the back to practice archery. He would often see him when Yu Qingjie greeted him. After breakfast, the two went to class together. When in the morning and Wu in the afternoon, Murong Yan went back to his room after class, and would not come out for the rest of the night. This is not at all the same as Yu Qingjie's expected vixen drama of scratching his head and jumping up and down. The other party's work and rest is better than her, the lady of the family. Yu Qingjie has never caught the wrong thing about the other party, and her plan to teach the vixen can only be shelved indefinitely. Yu Qingjie stared eagerly for half a month, and found that the only thing wrong with Murong Yan was that he didn't wear a skirt, but only a Hu suit. Hu clothing was passed down from the north. Nomads need to ride horses to hunt. Naturally, they don't wear the tops and bottoms that are regarded as orthodox in the Central Plains, but they are more accustomed to the Hu clothing with narrow sleeves and long trousers. The scholar bureaucrats of the southern dynasties scoffed at such a barbaric style, but the rulers of the northern dynasties both had Hu blood. However, this kind of narrow-sleeved clothes is only popular among the army and the lower classes. The upper-class noblemen will wear them in private, but they will still change into orthodox clothes with wide robes and large sleeves on important occasions. This is true for men, let alone women. Few decent ladies wear Hu suits. Hu suits are indeed convenient, but what do nobles want to do conveniently? Just like Yu Qingjie, her clothes are a loose upper jacket, and a complicated intercolor skirt underneath, which requires several layers of inner and outer layers. So Murong Yan's dressing style is really shocking. Yu Qingjie didn't care at first, but his father suddenly wanted Yu Qingjie to learn how to ride and shoot, and without waiting for her consent, he pushed him in. Every time Yu Qingjie took a bow, he would be entangled in his sleeves, while the fox on the other side had narrow sleeves around his waist, firing arrows with a bang bang bang. Yu Qingjie was forcibly demoted to the control group, and after holding back for a few days, Yu Qingjie gave up completely and asked the maid to cut a set of Hu clothes. She naively thought that the clothes were dragging her down. Yu Qingjie changed into a red Hu suit. The whole body was bright red, and the collar was embroidered with black patterns by Bai Ji. Bai Ji originally strongly objected to Yu Qingjie's change of Hu people's clothes, but after Yu Qingjie put on the semi-finished product and walked around, Bai Ji silently shut up, and then personally modified Yu Qingjie's waistline and embellished it with patterns. Yu Qingjie was weak and glamorous when she was wearing a large and flowing skirt, as if she was about to blow up with the wind all the time. After changing into a Hu suit, the softness in her appearance was diluted, and her beauty was more prominent. Yu Qingjie supported the bow with all her strength, but she didn't hold on for long. Her right hand soon lost strength, and the arrow feathers from her fingertips flew out, swaying in the low altitude for a moment, and then fell to the ground. Yu Qingjie sighed. She had tried her best, let alone counting, she couldn't even hit the target. At this moment, there was a buzz from the next door, and then the sound of arrows hitting the target came from the front. Yu Qingjie gritted her teeth silently. Is she going to lose to a vixen? Yu Qingjie gritted her teeth, raised her bow and arrow, and hit the target again. She exerted all her strength this time, and when the bowstring was too stretched, she suddenly let go, letting the arrow fly out from between her fingers. This time she hit the target, but it wasn't hers. In just a short moment, Mirongyan has already shot the third arrow, but at this moment, an arrow suddenly rushed from the side, knocking his arrow feathers to the wrong side, which also affected the arrow that hit the bullseye. Mirongyan finally put down his bow and cast the first straight eye of the day at Yu Qingjie. The development of the situation was completely unexpected by Yu Qingjie, so it seemed that she deliberately went wrong. In fact, she did. Yu Qingjie glanced at him calmly again, and said, "What are you looking at?" The master said when he left, "Let everyone shoot 20 arrows." In Mirongyan's opinion, 20 arrows are not even as good as drinking water. Obviously Master Wu said this to fool Yu Qingjie. Mirongyan has long been proficient in riding and archery, so he doesn't need his master to assign tasks. However, Yu Qingjie's behavior just now was regarded as a great provocation among the Xianbei people, and deflecting the opponent's arrow obviously required considerable skill and accuracy. However, this weak woman who can't even draw a bow? Mirongyan was disdainful in her heart. She provoked him, in the next life. Mirongyan concentrated on drawing the bow, when there was the sound of wheezing from the side. His mind was disturbed, and he lost his aim when shooting the arrow. Mirongyan put down the bow expressionlessly, and said indifferently, "Don't press the arrow feather with the second finger." "What?" Mirongyan had already turned his face away indifferently. He never said a second time. Yu Qingjie realized later that Mirongyan was pointing her. Yu Qingjie couldn't hide her surprise. How could a vixen be so kind? Yu Qingjie snorted lightly, and murmured in a low voice, "You don't need to pretend." Even so, Yu Qingjie couldn't help but deliberately adjust the bow when he released the bow, but it turned out to be a bad thing. This was not a posture she was familiar with. The bowstring was released with a buzzing sound, and quickly brushed against her forearm. The iron-making process is limited, and even if the bowstring is deliberately polished, there are still many rough burrs on the edge. Yu Qingjie hissed and hurried to look at her arm. Even though blood was wiped across a layer of clothes, Yu Qingjie had never been injured so badly, and water glistened quickly in her eyes reflexively. Mirongyan didn't care about the movement next to him, but when he heard Yu Qingjie's exclamation, he turned around casually, and was caught off guard when he saw bright red blood oozing from his skin. Mirongyan's pupil shrank, and his fingers immediately curled up. Mirongyan Huoda turned his head, his eyes fixed on the bare ground, his fingers loosened and tightened, trying to restrain the clamoring desire for blood in his veins. Although Yu Qingjie's words a few days ago were disrespectful, Mirongyan knew she was right. The men of Mirong's family really yearned for blood and killing from birth. The courtiers always resented the courtiers and blamed these villains for leading the Holy Majesty badly, so they really flattered these people. Starting from his great ancestor, every generation of the Murong family has produced a few different types, who are naturally cruel and ruthless, and cannot control their love for blood. Murong's family was originally the great Sima of the former dynasty, but in the end they changed the dynasty and became the emperor. Among them, Murong Erlang's family inheritance of bravery and fighting skills is indispensable. But the world is so ridiculous, the more amazing and talented people in their family, the stronger their addiction to blood. This is true of Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty, and so is his uncle, the current emperor. The former prince was very dissatisfied with his father and brother's actions, but how could he have imagined that his son, Murong Yan, was a terrifying demon? Murong Yan is extremely talented in rhythm, riding and archery, and martial arts, but his flaws in this area are stronger than those of his grandfather and uncle. Stimuli such as alcohol and women's will aggravate his loss of control, so Murong Yan doesn't drink at all, and he has no concubines around him, just to prevent his mind from losing control, so that he can no longer restrain the desire for blood in his body. Yu Qingjie held her arm distressedly, the wound was still bleeding. The master who taught bow and arrow was a warrior, so it was inconvenient to bring a maid, so Beizi Beiji and others were not nearby. It was the first time Yu Qingjie had suffered such a serious injury, and now she didn't know who to turn to. The hot pain in her arm occupied most of her attention, but even so, she noticed that the vixen's state seemed not right. He turned his back, his upper body was tense, and the obvious arc of arm muscles could be seen through the sleeves. Yu Qingjie didn't know why, so she asked out of good intentions, "What's wrong with you?" Murong Yan didn't answer. After a while, he seemed to be struggling to squeeze out a few words. "There is clear water over there, wash off the wound. Don't touch water after seeing blood, otherwise it will leave a scar." She is still worried about leaving scars, so innocent and cute, hasn't she realized that the most dangerous beast is by her side now? Murong Yan's eyes were red, the pupils kept shrinking, and there was a strange blue faintly glowing in the darkness. He took a deep breath, exhausted all his control, walked to the bucket and wet the towel, and threw it into Yu Qingjie's hand without looking back. "Cover the wound." Yu Qingjie wanted to say something else, but Murong Yan couldn't bear to interrupt her. "The swelling is gone. Applying cold kerchief to the wound can reduce swelling?" Yu Qingjie had never heard of it, but she thought it was just that she had never heard of it, so she covered the wound obediently. Fortunately, Bai Ji came quickly, and when she saw Yu Qingjie's arm, she immediately called out heart and liver, and took Yu Qingjie back to bandage again in distress. The school ground finally became quiet again. Murong Yan's eyes were terribly black. He aimed his bow at the target, and fired 3 arrows in a row, with unprecedented strength and aim. The author has something to say. Small theater, Yu Qingjie, I don't want to learn. Mouth covered, Yu Wenjun, no, you think so? Yanzhou, Jiaoping County, Yujia. The maid wearing blue half-sleeves opened the curtain and saluted respectfully, "Miss 4. Is the old man asleep?" Lejun just fell asleep. As soon as the maid finished speaking, an old voice came from inside, "Is it Si Niang?" Yu Qingjie immediately put on a gentle and intelligent smile, and walked in without waiting for the maidservant to tell her, "Old gentleman, yes. The 4 generations of the Yu family live in the same family, and Mr. Yu can see that his great-granddaughter has grown to 14 or 5 years old. She is indeed quite old. Some people become Buddhas when they get old, with kind eyebrows and kind eyes, pity the poor and the weak, but more people will infinitely magnify their youthful side, become more and more authoritarian and extreme, and their desire to control is getting stronger and stronger. Apparently, this is the case with this old gentleman of the Yu family who has been honored all his life." Yu Qingjie knelt in front of Lejun Yu's bed, took the medicine from Lejun Yu with her own hands, took a small spoonful of it and tasted it in another soup bowl, and then offered the rest of the medicine to Lejun Yu. "Mister, the heat is just right, I specially ordered them to add licorice today, so it won't be bitter. This movement is smooth and appropriate, as if it has been practiced countless times. Old Master Yu looks extremely comfortable. She took a sip of the medicine and wondered, why is today's medicine different from the past? Yu Qinja smiled shyly, my son used to see that you felt uncomfortable taking medicine, and felt guilty, so I looked through ancient books and found a few simple health-preserving prescriptions. My son made his own decision, and I asked Lejun to punish you. Old Master Yu was both surprised and delighted. You also know medicine. How dare you, just copy medical books, don't dare to play tricks. Old Master Yu patted Yu Qinja's hand in relief, and said, my son is indeed a natural-born exquisite heart. I haven't discovered it before, until these few days. After visiting my place for a few days, I found that the incense I used was not good, and that it was most likely to cause lung disease due to deficiency in heat. Now I can learn it without a teacher by relying only on ancient books. Here comes the health-preserving soup. Having a daughter like this is really a blessing for the family, and the heavens will rejuvenate my Yu family. Yu Qinja smiled and said she didn't dare, but there was a smile on her face, obviously she felt the same in her heart. She heard the cold electronic voice in her mind beeping, Old Master Yu's favorability +10, and the reputation of an all-round talent +10. After Yu Qinja heard what was going on behind her, the smile on her face became more real. What is born intelligent and versatile, no one can learn medical skills without a teacher only by relying on medical books. The so-called medical prescriptions she found from ancient books were just random excuses to fool Old Master Yu. In fact, this is the prescription given to her by the system. Yu Qinja can easily obtain the results of 10 or even 20 years of practicing medicine without doing anything. Ever since she had the help of the system, Yu Qinja was as powerful as a bamboo in the back house, like a tiger with wings added. Today, I will change Lejun for a calming incense, and tomorrow I will embroider a system-produced knee pad for the rheumatic elder, and she will be able to write the most exquisite parallel poems the day after tomorrow. However, in just 3 months, Yu Qinja's reputation as a talented woman has already filled Yanzhou. She is confident that if she continues with this momentum, even the immortal monarchs in the sky who have no desires and desires will move their hearts for her, and the tragic path of her previous life will never happen again. Yu Lejun intentionally blamed him and said, didn't you go back to rest in the morning? After an hour, why did you come here again? Although I am old and useless, I am not the kind of vicious mother-in-law. Granddaughters and juniors can only rest in front of their eyes. A young girl like you should go outside more often, and stay by my side often. I am afraid that you will be tainted with old age. How could it be? Yu Qinja smiled and said, old gentleman is well informed and knowledgeable, and women don't give in to men. If I stay by your side for 1 day, I can learn more than studying for 10 years. If old gentleman doesn't dislike me, I wish I could learn from you from time to time. Yu Lejun smiled, pretending to be angry and said, you can say good things to make me, an old woman, happy. Yu Qinja smiled faintly. When she saw that there seemed to be letters on the desk behind the candlestick, her eyes moved, and she lamented as if unintentionally, father hasn't come back for 2 years. It's been windy and rainy these days. Do you know how your father is in good health? He is wandering outside alone, and Qingzhou is a remote place, so I am really afraid that no one will take care of my father when he is sick. When the disobedient grandson was mentioned, old Master Yu's expression became visibly gloomy. She snorted and sneered again and again, he is very assertive now, his wings are hardened, and he no longer needs us old bones to pave the way for him. How can the old man say that? Yu Qinja pursed her lips and smiled lightly, and said, Qingzhou has no famous families, and people come and go from poor families. How can this uneducated barbarian place compare with Yanzhou? What's more, Guangling is only a middle school county, father stays there, no gentry friends, no celebrity recommendation, can only waste time. If you transfer father back, it will be good for father. Father will understand your painstaking efforts. Yu Qingjia's idea was very simple. The letter on the desk case had Yu Wenjun's stamp on it, and judging from the old gentleman's gloomy expression, Yu Wenjun must have refused to go home again. Really ignorant of flattery, Yu Qingjia's goal in her rebirth is to become a concubine. If her physical father is mud that can't support the wall, she won't bother to promote her, as long as he doesn't regret coming to beg her in the future. Although Yu Wenjun is not important, Yu Qingjia is very important. After all, Yu Qingjia is the heroine, and Mary Sue's halo is strong. When did she meet the hero King Lanja? Yu Qingjia called the system quietly in her mind. System, when did the hero and heroine meet? The system remained silent for a moment. Its database comes from your history books. When did Emperor Qixiang and Empress Mingzi meet? This will not appear in the history books. The system then said sternly, the host has insufficient permissions and cannot view it. Yu Qingjia sighed, and sure enough, she doesn't have enough points now, so she can't do anything. In her previous life, she and Yu Qingjia were not close, and they ignored each other when they met. Yu Qingjia really didn't pay attention to Yu Qingjia's movements. It stands to reason that Yu Qingjia didn't have much chance. It should be that after King Lanja met Yu Qingjia, he was influenced by the halo of the heroine, so he married her involuntarily. Yu Qingjia disdains it. She is indeed a brainless Mary Sue. Men all over the world love her, even the male protagonist is not exempt. Obviously he is better than the heroine, but he is the female supporting role. Although Yu Qingjia guessed like this, she didn't dare to take the slightest risk. After all, the plot revolved around Yu Qingjia. If Yu Qingjia had some adventures that she didn't know about in advance, it would be bad. Therefore, it is safer to put the heroine in front of my eyes. Therefore, Yu Qingjia must let Yu Wenjun return to Jiaoping County. Yu Qingjia vaguely reminded Le Jun before, but now it seems that the system's strategy still failed. A wave of displeasure welled up in Yu Qingjia's heart. Since her rebirth, with the help of the system, she has rarely violated her will. Yu Qingjia wanted to persuade Le Jun again, but just as she opened her mouth, a needle-like pain suddenly came from her mind. Host, you violated the rules. Enduring her headache, Yu Qingjia forcefully reasoned in her mind, but Le Jun has already been persuaded. As long as we add fuel to the fire and ask Le Jun to write to remind me, Yu Wenjun will not be able to hold back sooner or later. The mechanical electronic voice in her mind seemed to mock lightly, and Yu Qingjia was taken aback, thinking she had heard it wrong. The system is just an intelligent body without emotion, how could it have such a humanized reaction? The system quickly returned to a cold voice without any emotion. Host, your behavior has exceeded the warning value of the female supporting system just now. I have an obligation to warn you and take corresponding measures if necessary. Yu Qingjia still refused to accept it. She was just short of a goal. Why did she give up halfway? She wanted to urge Lao Jun, but a sharp pain suddenly came from the sea of consciousness, and it seemed that it had penetrated even the bone for a while. Yu Qingjia couldn't help screaming, and the teacup in her hand fell to the ground with a bang. Old Master Yu was taken aback by Yu Qingjia's sudden movement. Seeing Yu Qingjia's frightening expression, she spoke solemnly, "Si Niang, what's wrong with you?" Yu Qingjia resisted the continuous pain in her mind, and tried her best to smile at Yu Le Jun. "I'm fine, I just didn't sleep well at noon, and now I feel a little dizzy." Didn't sleep well? Looking at Yu Qingjia's performance, Old Master Yu couldn't believe that it was just dizziness. But Yu Qingjia firmly insisted that she was fine, and immediately apologized, and withdrew. After leaving Mr. Yu's room, the system still had the same flat electronic sound, but it was because of the calmness that it seemed to shudder. The host has violated the rules. According to the contract, we have the right to take appropriate precautions against the host. It can be punished by force. The host is only a primary violation today, so only a first-level punishment will be imposed. This is only the first level. Yu Qingji still felt lingering fear when she thought of the almost heart-piercing pain just now, but is this just the lowest level? The system coldly admitted. A chill slowly crept up Yu Qingji's spine. Then what is the highest level? Eradicate. The system's voice sounded as conscientious as before, but Yu Qingji felt cold. Even though it was spring and April, she seemed to be in the coldest winter, and the cold weather turned into needles, which penetrated into her bone marrow finally. You actually endangered my life? Why didn't you tell me about such an important matter before? You didn't ask. I don't know if it was an illusion, but the system voice seemed to be a little mocking. Host, you have signed a soul contract with us. If you regret it halfway, you will be obliterated according to the contract. Yu Qingji suddenly regretted the fact that she signed the contract in a hurry that day. She has been so happy in the past few months and everything has gone smoothly. She privately regards the system as a tool for her to drive. She never thought that her and the system's status may be the same. Inversely, She read Yu Qingji's inner activities. The system's speech slowed down, and his attitude was almost kind. Don't worry, as long as you follow our conditions, you won't be obliterated. Since childhood, Yu Qingji has served as a servant and maidservant, and looked down on common people. She is the only one who orders others. When has she been ordered by others? But she didn't dare to offend the system. The system could easily kill her, but she couldn't do anything to it. What's more, the system was in her mind, and even a few thoughts could not be hidden from the system. After Yu Qingji was reborn, she was relying on the system for everything, so she could only give in and admit her mistake to the system. I was wrong just now. But you can't let Yu Qingji roam free in other counties. She is the heroine after all, aren't you afraid? Your behavior is too stupid. To force them back, I have my own way. Qingzhou and Yanzhou are separated by thousands of miles. At this time, Qingzhou is still shrouded in a vast mist. The rain was pattering outside. Yu Qingji propped his chin to watch the rain. Outside the window, the water and the sky lined up, and the raindrops fell from the eaves one after another, hitting the blue stone board one after another, splashing many thin puddles. It rained suddenly today. The master who taught classics and history was probably delayed by the rain, and he hasn't come yet. Yu Qingji was bored after watching Huyu, so he folded paper into various shapes to play with. A gust of wind suddenly blew in from the window, and the moisture was moist. Before Yu Qingji had time to react, the ball of paper in her hand flew to the other side. Murong didn't turn his eaves back, and grabbed the paper ball precisely. He held it in front of him and looked, and found that it was just a ball of paper that had sneaked up on him. He was obviously very speechless at Yu Qingji's actions, and he threw it back without raising his eyes. Yu Qingji was hit on the forehead unexpectedly. She was stunned for a moment, then crumpled the paper in hand into another ball, and threw it vigorously towards Murong Yan. The skill of throwing paper lies in strength. Sometimes the harder you throw, the less far you can throw. The ball of paper filled with all of Yu Qingji's anger only flew halfway before falling to the ground. Murong Yan looked back, with the disdain in his eyes not bothering to hide. In fact, he never hid it. Yu Qingji gritted her teeth. Don't be too arrogant. Aren't you afraid that my father and I will sue, and you will have a bad life in the future? As much as you like. It's useless for me to worry about whether you fell ill that day. From this point of view, you are really wolf-hearted. It was only then that Murong Yan remembered that Yu Qingji seemed to have scratched his hand a few days ago. He glanced out of the corner of his eye, and sure enough, he saw that the back of her hand was wrapped in several layers of white cloth. How much injury, why this? Murong Yan is born without empathy. Others will feel sorry for the poor and babies, but Murong Yan will not. Poverty, loneliness, and death are all their own business. Why should they be pitiful? As for Yu Qingji's injury, what does it have to do with him? Murong Yan was cold and silent, and Yu Qingji didn't bother to talk to the vixen. She stared at the vast rain curtain outside the window, and murmured, Master hasn't come for so long, don't tell me something happened on the way. When Yu Qingjie heard a very light and cold laugh from behind, she turned her head in displeasure. What do you mean? Heaven and earth are close to the emperor and teacher, you must respect the teacher. Respect the teacher and respect the way. Mirongyan slowly repeated these 4 words. He looks quite beautiful with an ambiguous gender. When he speaks in a low voice, his voice is cold and melancholy. A banquet, a nobleman who is extravagant, desperate to be gorgeous to the extreme, and degenerates quickly. After Mirongyan finished reading these 4 words, he smiled lightly. Do you know how the deposed prince died? Reported by the villain. By whom? Yu Qingjie was questioned. Every day she heard Yu Wenjun angrily accuse the treacherous servants of soliciting words and framing Zhong Liang. Of course, she took the side of the former prince as a matter of course. But Yu Qingjie didn't know what was going on. There was a vague smile on Mirongyan's lips. He sat in front of the desk, with one hand casually resting on the desk. His eyes were dark and invisible. It's his teacher. The sound of rain outside the window, mixed with the sound of rain, Yu Qingjie thought she heard it wrong. What? But Mirongyan didn't have the intention to continue talking. The prince can live in the East Palace, so it can be seen that he is not a fool, who would talk about government affairs anywhere. When he said those words that day, he really felt that the people present were absolutely trustworthy people. But who knows, his teacher felt scared when he heard it. If the prince's words were reported, wouldn't they, the audience, all be in bad luck? That being the case, it is better for him to report. The Donggong murder case started from this. Mirongyan had already shifted his eyes back to his scroll, but Yu Qingjie looked at him, but couldn't look back for a long time. What did Mirongyan mean by these words? She slowly glanced at the desk at the top belonging to the master, and suddenly felt shuddering. Yu Qingjie stroked her arm silently, where goosebumps had already formed. If Mirongyan looked resentful and contemptuous, Yu Qingjie would still think it was normal, but he was so casual, as if telling a joke. When did her father's taste become so strong? Father actually likes femme fatale? Later, the master came in a hurry under an umbrella. No one knew about this little episode before the class, and it turned over silently with the scroll. But how can the things that happened really leave no traces? After class, Yu Qingjie looked at Mirongyan from hostility to defensiveness. Because of the rain, the afternoon riding and archery class was cancelled. Yu Qingjie was greatly relieved, and the maids also stayed in the house to shelter from the rain. Several young girls got together and had endless jokes, talking and laughing all afternoon. In the evening, Yu Qingjie suddenly remembered that she seemed to have left her purse in class. In fact, this is not such an important matter, and there is still time to get it tomorrow morning, but Yu Qingjie has nothing to do, and just as the rain stopped outside and the air is very good, Yu Qingjie took the maid and walked towards the class place like a walk. Halfway there, a figure flashed out of the corner of Yu Qingjie's eyes, and she immediately hissed at the servant girl, and she walked lightly to the back of the pillar, poking out a pair of eyes to look forward. Just after the rain, what is the vixen doing outside? Yu Qingjie vaguely felt that this matter was very unusual. Her curiosity about the vixen immediately overwhelmed her purse, and after whispering to the maid, she tiptoed behind Mirongyan and followed him secretly. Yu Qingjie hid in the corner and saw Mirongyan open the back door. A man was already waiting outside the back door. The two of them got closer and said something, then Mirongyan handed the man a bulging package, and the man turned around quickly and left. Afterwards, Mirongyan took a slow look, and after confirming that no one was paying attention, he took a step back and closed the door. He also seemed to glance back as he pulled the deadbolt. Yu Qingjie quickly withdrew her body and leaned her back against the wall, her heart pounding. Oh my God, did the vixen have a private meeting with a foreigner just now? People in the world often laugh at themselves, but this is only aimed at men. For women, it is still a very bad reputation to meet men privately and give and receive privately. What's more, the vixen is not a lady from a privileged family, she is a concubine. And the package she handed out was bulging, obviously it was money. It wasn't enough to have a secret meeting with a foreigner to betray her father, and even used their family's money to support the outsider's lover? Whether it is tolerable or unbearable, Yu Qingjie didn't care about her purse anymore, and immediately walked towards the main room with Bai Ji. When Murong Yan came back, he glanced down inadvertently, and sure enough, he saw shoe prints at the base of the wall. It just rained today, and the moss in the corner of the wall was wet, and the traces were very abrupt after standing behind people. Murong Yan looked at the marks on the corner of the wall, and hooked the corners of his mouth in an unclear manner. Father! Yu Qingjie hurried in, her grand skirt billowing like a bird's wings. Father, I have something to tell you. Yu Wenjun looked up from the copybook, and said, oh strangely, what do you want to say, why are you running in such a hurry? Yu Qingjie knelt beside her father, her white and soft skirt stretched across the ground, with an indescribably gorgeous look. As early as when he was going out, Murong Yan found Yu Qingjie. As soon as Yu Qingjie left, Murong Yan followed. Now, he stopped outside the door, quietly waiting for Yu Qingjie's next words. He told Yu Qingjie today about the abolition of the prince's teacher. Such words may be very delicate to the ears of Yu Wenjun and other courtiers. Everyone understands the reason why Fei Niao makes a good bow and hides his bow, not to mention that Murong Yan is still the son of a common man who has nothing, and has the title of King Lanja, but he dare not even show himself as a man. If he dared to say such a thing today, when he really returned to the country, would the heroes like Yu Wenjun really die well? I'm afraid everyone has to think about it in their hearts. Now, as long as Yu Qingjie said what he said in the morning, she could take revenge on him and get rid of him. Murong Yan even put on a smile and waited quietly. In the room, Yu Wenjun also looked at her with concern. Yu Qingjie took a deep breath, and said desperately, Father, did you know that vixen Jing Huan actually met a foreigner in private? Murong Yan had a smile in his eyes, and when he heard this, he raised his eyebrows unexpectedly. At this moment, the room was also completely silent. Yu Wenjun looked at his daughter for a while, and then said, oh! What else? Yu Qingjie expected his father to be furious, and no matter how bad he was, he would show his displeasure. However, what is an ordinary oh? Yu Qingjie also looked at him strangely. Father! Yu Wenjun coughed, not knowing how to explain it to his daughter. It must be impossible to say that women in the back house can meet foreign men casually. Isn't this teaching his daughter badly? But if I don't say that, I really can't explain the special nature of my concubine Ji. In the end, Yu Wenjun could only say vaguely, Jia, you know these things are not good, and I will deal with them myself, so you don't have to worry about them. Real? Yu Wenjun nodded very guilty. Really, when did father ever lie to you? Okay then. Yu Qingjie stood up, took 2 steps outside, and couldn't help but turn her head to remind, Father, you must deal with it fairly. Not only did she meet outsiders privately, she also secretly stuffed purses for outsiders. Yu Wenjun coughed again, his face suddenly became serious, and he said in a deep voice, Jia, this kind of thing is very inappropriate, you must not do this. Yu Qingjie nodded obediently. When she went out, she happened to be facing Murong Yan. Murong Yan looked at her with an indescribable smile. Murong Yan is usually eccentric, but now, his eyes seemed to be genuinely smiling. Yu Qingjie was terrified by his gaze. She glared back ferociously, why are you laughing? Murong Yan seemed to shake his head. He withdrew his gaze and looked ahead quietly. After a while, he suddenly asked, why didn't you say another thing? Yu Qingjie's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately thought of Murong Yan's shocking words in class. She gave him an annoyed look, and said in a stern voice, it's up to you. After Yu Qingjie returned to the house that day, she calmly waited for her father to deal with it fairly. But after 2 days, the weather was calm. Yu Qingjie couldn't hold back, and urged Bai Ji to go outside to inquire about news. Bai Ji came back after a long time. She lowered her head, her expression looked very complicated. Yu Qingjie was suspicious, and immediately stopped her and asked, "Did you find out? What did father say?" Bai Ji hesitated, and kept looking around. "Miss. Explain." Bai Ji gritted her teeth, and said desperately, "I didn't find out how they dealt with Jing's servants, but I heard from the kitchen staff that they gave Jing the key and the pair of cards." Yu Qingjie's eyes widened in astonishment, and after a while, she murmured again, "You said that instead of punishing her, father also handed over the financial power of the back house to her." Bai Ji lowered her head, obviously not daring to agree. Yu Qingjie sat on the couch for a while, then stood up abruptly, about to go out with a cold face. Bai Ji hurriedly stepped forward to stop her. "Miss, why are you getting angry with a concubine? She is just the concubine Ji brought back by the prefect. Although she is famous, she is not considered a serious elder of yours. Bear with me and wait for the prefect to be fresh. It's fine as long as it's over. If you go against the prefect now, you'll only hurt the father-daughter relationship between Miss and the prefect. How can I bear it? My father has no distinction between right and wrong. It's such a serious matter for a woman's family to meet a man in private." When Mrs. Jing poured him a ecstasy soup, he became unconscious. "I don't know what to do now. In the future, if Jing's hand reaches out to me, it will be too late." Bai Ji failed to stop Yu Qingjie, and Yu Qingjie's eyes were brightened by anger. When she walked to the main room, she happened to see Yu Wenjun and Murong Yan walking out side by side. They didn't know what they were talking about, and Yu Wenjun listened very carefully. Yu Qingjie didn't believe in the past, how can a man be seduced by a seductive woman at will, and never care about the life and death of his wife and children from then on. But now, her biological father's actions have slapped her in the face. He could bear such a thing as a concubine's private meeting with a man who gave him a cuckold. Yu Qingjie was angry and felt wronged. When Yu Wenjun saw Yu Qingjie, he froze, and a fatherly smile burst into his eyes. "Jia." He obviously forgot what he said when he fooled Yu Qingjie 2 days ago. "Father." Yu Qingjie quickly saluted Yu Wenjun with a straight face, and then her eyes fell on Murong Yan. Her tone was cold. "Father, I heard that you gave her the key and the pair of cards." Yu Wenjun didn't expect his daughter to come here to talk about this matter. "This is not a big deal, King Lanja is not a real woman in the back house, not to mention he has another identity. It is obviously more beneficial for their plans to entrust him with the management of the back house. Yes, Jing Huan is your elder. I feel very relieved as a father to entrust him with the safety of the back house. Look at this standard stupid talk, no wonder everyone says that if there is a stepmother, there will be a stepfather. I am afraid that in the eyes of a man, the woman he loves is extremely beautiful, even if someone presents the truth to him, he will feel that she is someone else's concubine who is persecuting him. Father, she met outside men in secret, and gave away the belongings of her family members to outsiders at will. You still let her take charge of the inner courtyard? Besides, she is just a concubine. No one would let a concubine take control of the backyard. Although our Yu family is counted not a famous family, but after all, it is also a famous and respectable family in Yanzhou. You are like a concubine who spoils your concubine and kills your wife. Where do you put me and where do you put your mother? Jia. Yu Wenjun didn't expect Yu Qingjie to say such words. The status of concubines is very low. Of course he knows that although scholars regard giving concubines as fashion, no one would marry a concubine as a wife. When everyone talks about marriage, they will marry a lady of the right family. Things like carrying on the family line, serving the parents, and presiding over the gift are also regarded as the functions of the wife, not the concubine. The concubine G is for fun. If someone let the concubine take care of the family business, I am afraid they will be laughed at by the nobles of the same class. But Mirong Yan is not a concubine, he is not even a woman. Yu Wenjun didn't know how to explain this matter. He tried to comfort his daughter. I know everything you said, as a father, I know it well, so you don't have to worry about it. These words were too perfunctory, and even Yu Qingjie couldn't fool her. Yu Qingjie's eyes were dark and bright, and because of her anger, her whole face became alive, and she was too shocked to look at it. Mirong Yan began to feel that the scene in front of him was very funny, and he also stood on the sidelines watching the play with a faint smile. But at this moment, Mirong Yan suddenly discovered that this daughter of the Yu family was really very beautiful. Her black hair was like clouds, her eyebrows and eyes were frightening, but her lips were delicate and bright red, as if coated with a layer of glaze, the color was like blood. Such a beauty is most likely to make men have the desire to conquer and destroy. Yu Qingjie's eyes were burning with fire, and she pointed at Mirong Yan with one hand, and stared at Yu Wenjun with her eyes. Since she came, you have always done some inexplicable things. I thought that father, you know it well, but now, you don't even have principles. It doesn't matter anymore. In your heart, is she more important than my daughter? Mirong Yan was not annoyed by being gestured with his fingers. He glanced at Yu Wenjun with a half-smile, and waited for Yu Wenjun's answer like watching a good show. Yu Wenjun looked at his daughter who was raised like a jewel and a treasure since childhood, and then at the young master Lan Jiqing who had an ambiguous smile on the corner of his mouth. For the first time, he felt a throbbing pain in his brain, and life was unbearably difficult. What did he do wrong and why did he make this choice? Yu Qingjie stared at her father relentlessly, like all daughters who lost their mothers and their father brought back a new one, persistently wanting to know who is more important in his father's heart. Yu Wenjun secretly glanced at Mirong Yan, and found that he was looking at Yu Qingjie with a smile as if he was having some fun. Yu Wenjun felt a big headache. One was the precious daughter, and the other was the young master who would be loyal to him in the future. How should he choose? Yu Wenjun struggled and said, Jia, you and Jing Huan are different, you two cannot compare. Yu Wenjun's original intention was to say that the daughter and Mingzhu each have their own importance, and they cannot be compared on the same platform. But when Yu Qingjie heard these words, she completely changed her appearance. Yu Qingjie blinked, and her dark eyes immediately glowed with luster. You actually turned towards her, you actually took sides with her. After Yu Qingjie finished speaking, she suddenly turned her head and ran away. Mirong Yan couldn't bear it anymore, lowered her head and let out a chuckle. This was probably the only time in his 2 years of fleeing career that he really laughed. Mirong Yan just went to discuss the matter with Yu Wenjun, and when Yu Qingjie appeared, the matter had already been roughly finished. After Yu Qingjie's interruption, the two of them were even less in the mood to talk about serious matters. Mirong Yan maintained a rare good mood, and walked towards the residence at a leisurely pace. When he stepped on the corridor that he must pass through when returning to the courtyard, his footsteps stopped invisibly. On the winding corridor, there was a woman standing with her back to him. Mirong Yan found himself laughing inadvertently again. He walked into the corridor as if he didn't see the figure. He also really wanted to know what kind of tricks his daughter wanted to do. Sure enough, when the two passed by, Yu Qingjie's voice came from behind coldly, "Stop." She tried her best to make her voice appear cold and majestic, but her tone had a delicate nasal voice, which sounded like she wanted people to continue to bully her and cry. Mirong Yan stopped in his tracks rarely, turned his head and glanced at her eyes, crying. The corners of Yu Qingjie's eyes were red. She tried her best to hide the tears. She thought she couldn't see it anymore, but the other party saw through it. Yu Qingjie's eyes widened, and he said viciously, "No." The 14-year-old girl was crying out of anger, and now she still comes to her with an ending sound. Even at the age when a man is the most unscrupulous boy, he is not willing to say harsh words. However, feelings like pity and pity do not exist in Mirong Yan. The corners of his mouth are slightly hooked, and his eyes are full of light because of the smile. The indistinguishable beautiful boy smiles like an angel, but the words he speaks are extremely malicious. Just such a little thing is worth your tears, it's really useless. What's more, what's the use of you crying? Mirongyan admired the pitiful appearance of the defeated general, and slowly stabbed him in the heart. If you can't do it, you can't do it. You are still abandoned by your father. What you should do now is to surpass me, or expose me in front of you Wenjun. Hiding yourself and crying, what's the use of it other than giving me another reason to laugh at you? Yu Qingjie looked at Mirongyan, blinked, and wanted to cry. How could there be such a vicious woman in the world? Mirongyan harvested the spoils and left contentedly. Yu Qingjie lowered her head and wiped away her tears vigorously. The wicked woman was right, what's the use of her crying? However, she knew in her heart that the crying in her voice was uncontrollable. She shouted at Mirongyan's back, "Stop!" Mirongyan ignored him and continued to walk forward. Yu Qingjie became impatient, and hurried to catch up with him and grabbed his arm. "Stop for me!" Yu Qingjie didn't know why Mirongyan was so strong. They were only 1 year apart, yet Yu Qingjie couldn't match Mirongyan at all. Mirongyan shook it a few times, and found that he couldn't shake off the piece of brown sugar, so he ignored it and continued walking. Yu Qingjie grabbed Mirongyan's arm with both hands, and unexpectedly the whole body was pulled forward. Yu Qingjie was anxious and angry, and when she saw the pillar next to her in a panic, a flash of inspiration flashed in her mind. She quickly threw herself on the pillar, wrapped her arms around the thick wooden pillar, and firmly trapped Mirongyan's hand. "I see how you go now." Mirongyan felt the unusually soft touch on his arm, and his face changed suddenly. "Let go! Let go! Don't let go!" Yu Qingjie was also annoyed. She wrapped her arms around the pillar, trapping Mirongyan tightly. "With the help of the pillars, let's see how he can get away." In fact, it's not that Mirongyan can't pull it out, it's just that the position of his arm is a bit awkward. Yu Qingjie couldn't move him by himself, so he hugged the pillar with his whole body, and his hand was also sandwiched between Yu Qingjie and the wooden pillar. As long as Mirongyan exerted a little force, he could feel a soft touch on the outside of his arm. Mirongyan's body froze, and he couldn't move any more. The tips of Mirongyan's ears turned red visibly to the naked eye. The girl is still too young to bloom, and her figure is far from graceful, but there are already traces of where it should develop. Mirongyan tried to exert force from a different angle, but Yu Qingjie noticed it with a slight movement of his arm, and then hugged the pillar more tightly, still glaring at him fiercely. "You!" Mirongyan's body was stiff. From the arm held by Yu Qingjie to the right half of his body, he lost all sensation, as if it was no longer his. He didn't dare to move his arms anymore, but this made a certain part feel particularly strong. The girl's body was incredibly soft, and he could almost feel her heartbeat through the thin clothes. Mirongyan didn't move, neither didn't move, the tips of his ears turned red. "As a woman, how can you do such a thing? What's wrong with me?" Yu Qingjie was immediately annoyed when she heard this. "You dare to see the outsider secretly, but now you dare to talk about me. How can this be the same?" Mirongyan didn't know what to say. He just wanted to end this embarrassing situation as soon as possible. He didn't bother to think of excuses, so he told the truth to Yu Qingjie directly. "I see that the foreigner has something to do. It's important. Tell them what to say." Yu Qingjie didn't quite believe this. She wondered, "What's the matter with you? Really, if you don't believe me, go ask Yu Wenjun." Mirongyan's arms were trapped on the pillar, but his face was deliberately turned away, and even his eyes were fixed on the distance. "Can you let go now?" Yu Qingjie was dubious. She let go of her hand tentatively, and just found that Mirongyan was showing signs of moving. She quickly hugged the pillar again. Mirongyan gritted his teeth. "What do you want to do?" "I have something to tell you. You are not allowed to go." "Okay. Now as long as Yu Qingjie is willing to let go of him, she can say anything." Yu Qingjie looked at him suspiciously. "You promise?" Only then did Yu Qingjie let go slowly, and Murong Yan immediately withdrew his hand quickly after he was able to move freely, and took several steps back again and again. Fortunately, he really kept his promise, although he avoided it far away for fear of avoiding it, he didn't take the opportunity to leave. Murong Yan was moving his stiff right arm slightly in embarrassment, when he suddenly heard Yu Qingjie ask, "What are you going to do when you come to our house?" Murong Yan's hand stopped immediately. "Although you are a concubine, from my observation of your words and deeds, I am afraid that the environment in which you grew up was not bad. You can read and write, you are quick in writing, and you even have a foundation in archery. I am afraid that you are not a master who is willing to be inferior to others. Although I don't know why do you live here, but people live in the heaven and earth, are born by the heaven and the earth, are raised by their parents, and are blessed by their family and country. It can be said that they have shouldered a lot of kindness from birth. Even for these people, we must be an upright and open person." People. It's true that Yu Qingjie doesn't like Vixen, but when she thinks of what the Vixen said in class 2 days ago, and Murong Yan's cold and determined smile when she came out of the main room that day, she still feels that she has something to say to him. At that time, he must have thought that Yu Qingjie would inform her. The grievances between the two of them are private matters. It is a fact that Murong Yan is arrogant and domineering, and he has a prejudice against outsiders, but the conversation about the abolished prince in class that day was a private conversation. Yu Qingjie would reveal the truth to his father, but he would not be a whistleblower. Thing. Although Yu Qingjie was young and suffered a lot of persecution in the ancestral home, she was still the only daughter raised by her parents who cherished and loved her. Her mother taught her to be upright and kind since she was a child, and her father was also a respected celebrity and hermit. However, Yu Qingjie, who grew up in such a family, couldn't understand Murongjian's pessimistic assessment of people's hearts, nor could he understand where his strong sense of distrust came from. But if possible, Yu Qingjie still wanted to persuade him. It's a pity that Yu Qingjie's painstaking efforts fed all the dogs. When he heard the second sentence, Murong Yan moved his wrists as usual again. He thought Yu Qingjie had discovered something, but he still overestimated her. Yu Qingjie actually talked to him about the 3 cardinal principles and 5 constant principles, and that human nature is inherently good, which is simply ridiculous. Seeing this person's nonchalant attitude, Yu Qingjie sighed, but was not surprised. Since the friendship is shallow, then Yu Qingjie didn't go any further. She tidied up her sleeves and said coldly, "No matter what is the reason for your exile, but since you were brought back to the mansion by your father, then you are a member of our Yu family. Every move is related to my relatives. If you do something that insults the Yu family, I will never forgive you lightly." People from their Yu family? Murong Yan looked at the clusters of roses outside the corridor, and said with a half-smiley tone, "How dare you say that?" The dog-biting Lu Dongbin didn't know good people. Yu Qingjie was very angry. She threw off her sleeves vigorously, turned back, and walked away. After people walked out of the corridor, Murong Yan stretched out his hand and cut off a rose that was blooming enthusiastically outside the corridor. With a slight movement of his fingers, the rose flower fell into the soil, and the delicate petals were immediately stained with mud. The contrast between the red flower and the black mud is strong, as if it is burning with the last strength of its life, and it is no longer full of vitality. Sure enough, it was still so pleasing to the eye. Integrity, kindness, pity for the poor and the weak? Murong Yan smiled softly. Only those sons of aristocratic families who grew up in a greenhouse and will live under the blessing of their families all their lives in the future need these feelings. He is a fugitive who can't even reveal his gender. What he needs to master is only force. Grandfather became emperor from Decima because of military power, and it was also because of power that no one in the world dared to disobey his will. How brutal, how absurd and indulgent, he has done all the evil deeds an emperor can commit, but he has power in his hands, so the courtiers are angry and dissatisfied, and dare not speak out in person. Grab what you want, and destroy it if you can't get it, lest others get it. This is the principle that Mirong Yan has followed since childhood. In the front hall, Yu Wenjun was also talking with the master who taught Mirong Yan and Yu Qingjia's classics and history. Seeing Yu Wenjun sighing long and short, Mr. Wen wondered, "Brother Yu, why are you sighing?" Mentioning this matter, Yu Wenjun himself felt embarrassed. "I'm ashamed to say, it's about the little girl and the son." Hearing that person's name, Master Wen immediately straightened up and sat upright. "How do you say that? It's not that there is something wrong with the son, but my youngest daughter." Seeing that Master Wen had misunderstood, Yu Wenjun quickly explained, "The youngest daughter is the only blood of my late wife and I. She was held up like jewels since childhood, so it is inevitable that she will be lively and delicate. These days, the affairs of the mansion have been biased towards the young master, and you know the obvious identity of the young master, so my daughter has been arguing with me for many days because of this." It turned out to be such a thing. Master Wen was stunned, clapped his palms and laughed. "No wonder I have seen Qunjin and young master study together in the same room these days, but they don't say a word to each other, so that's how it is." Such a cute little daughter's mood seemed novel and funny to Mr. Wen, but when it fell to Yu Wenjun, he could only laugh wryly. It is rare for Mrs. Wen to smile so heartily. After laughing, he restrained his expression, and his tone suddenly became solemn. "My son was born in a noble family, but he experienced great changes when he was young. Although the past 2 years have been calm as before, there is no sign of collapse. However, he is only 15 years old. How can such a disposition be possessed by young people? Even experienced people like me may not be able to maintain a normal mind when encountering such family changes. However, the young master has always Higuang and I have been worried about this for a long time. We had no choice but to transfer this time. We were worried that the son would not accept the status of a woman, but now it seems that this step is the right one. Not to mention anything else, just because the son is now, there are many young people who are angry, and it is worthwhile for us to take this risky move." There was a fire in the backyard, and Yu Wenjun, who made the entire prefect's mansion go crazy, smiled reluctantly. "That's right, you're quite right." The two of them talked around Mirong Yan for a while, and they inevitably returned to the current situation. The king of Chongshan extorted violently, and acted against the law. The majestic emperor is able to go out to loot in the street. If the people show a little bit of dissatisfaction, he will order someone to hack him to death. How can such a foolish lord rule the world? However, the time when he will leave the palace is uncertain, and it is entirely dependent on his will. Even if the people want to hide, they don't know where to hide. Now everyone in Yuchen is in danger, and all industries are in decline, which is really a disaster for the people and a misfortune for the country. Speaking of the current emperor, both Yu Wenjun and Master Wen sighed. Yu Wenjun sighed. The prince was benevolent when he was alive, and the whole country put their hopes on him. Who would have known that the East Palace would be killed because of a villain's informant? Fortunately, the prince still left blood. Although no one dares to say it now, the whole country is still alive. Up and down, everyone is waiting for the young master. That's right. With Chongshan Wang's tyrannical, absurd, and pampering posture, it was only a matter of time before he raised troops to fight. What they have to do now is to protect Mirong Yan from growing up safely, and wait for a suitable time. Young master is 15 now, and his stature has not yet opened up. He can still pretend to be a woman, but after he grows up, at most 2 years, I'm afraid he won't be able to. Master Wen and Yu Wenjun looked at each other, and they both looked at each other. Here comes the worry. Although Mirong Yan hated others to say that, but he was really beautiful, and now that he is still young, with a slender frame and indistinguishable male and female, he can still be called a woman by force. Ordinary people who would doubt the gender of others, everyone has preconceived ideas, only think that this woman looks heroic. But when Mirong Yan continued to develop, his bones spread out, and he became taller, then he could not be fooled by only his height. This is a very serious problem. Timing is the most important thing for a coup d'état. In just 2 years, can they accumulate enough troops and find an opportunity for Chongshan King to arouse public anger and popular expectations? Yu Wenjun and Master Wen were relatively silent. After a while, Yu Wenjun said, "We still have at least 2 years of preparation time, let's take a step at a time. Now, the most important thing is to teach the young master poetry, etiquette, and governance." Master Wen's thoughts suddenly brightened, and he breathed a long sigh of relief. "Brother Yu's words are very true, I am worrying unnecessarily." Yu Wenjun and the civil and military masters carefully protected the news of Murong Yan, and the time when Murong Yan and Yu Qingjie were flying as classmates passed away with the sound of dripping. The weather was getting hotter and then gradually getting cooler. When the wind of early autumn blew, a red letter was suddenly received in the prefect's mansion. Yu Wenjun, the prefect of Guangling County in Qingzhou, is kind and gentle. Since he took office, he has been diligent in governing and loving the people, and has educated the people. He has heard about it. Now he has moved to Sima in Yanzhou, and he will go to the command today. It turned out to be Yu Wenjun's dispatch order. Yu Wenjun had been in power in Guangling for 2 years, and suddenly he was about to be transferred to Yanzhou. Yu Wenjun has always been negligent in getting acquainted with his colleagues and superiors, and he doesn't bother to use the common way to move his official position. How could he be discovered by the governor of Yanzhou and promoted him to Sima? If it is said that there are no artificial manipulations, Yu Wenjun would not believe it anyway. He thought of the old houses of the Yu family in Yanzhou, the domineering grandmother, and the deep-rooted families of the family, and he sighed deeply. He thought that if he insisted on going his own way, his elders would be displeased, but now that he has entered his 30s, and his daughter is 14 years old, Yu Wenjun really didn't expect that the family would ignore his wishes, without even asking, and directly intervene in his official career. But now, Yu Wenjun's dissatisfaction with being manipulated by his family is minimal, and he puts all his attention on King Lanja. King Lanja came to Guangling County to avoid people's eyes and ears. If Yu Wenjun was transferred back to Yanzhou, the ancestral house would be full of people, so what would the prince's disguise be? Yu Wenjun wrote to friends and family acquaintances to inquire for a long time, but the replies he received were not optimistic. If it is still possible for them to entrust favors to activities before the transfer order is issued, but the official transfer letter has been issued by the imperial court, and it has been filed with the Ministry of Officials in the capital. I am afraid that there is no way to change it. Friends don't understand Yu Wenjun's actions. It's a great thing to be transferred from the remote Zongjun prefect to Shangzhou Sima, so why worry? Yu Qingjie knelt on the couch, listening to her father sigh worriedly. I really didn't expect that Lejun would be so bossy. She didn't even ask about such a big matter, and directly made the decision for me. Stand up, I'm going to be manipulated by my grandmother for a year, I really have no face to face everyone. Yu Wenjun sighed. Yu Qingjie couldn't bear it, and said softly, Father, the family disregarded your political ambitions to exercise power arbitrarily, and you are also a victim, so you don't have to feel guilty. Yu Wenjun shook his head. He was already in his 30s, he didn't care about himself, he only felt sorry for his daughter and son. Murong Yan was also present, he poured a glass of buttermilk slowly, and said, the transfer order has already been issued, and it will be suspicious if you forcefully evade it. After all, there are more famous politicians in Yanzhou, who live in seclusion in the city, maybe this is good. Yu Wenjun understood Murong Yan's words. The matter has come to this point, and this is the only way to go on. Perhaps King Lanja was right. There are many famous families in Yanzhou with profound heritage, and the son moved to Yanzhou with them, which is more conducive to cultivating influence and accumulating strength. It's just that, Murong Yan's identity disguise has to be more elaborate. For King Lanja, who hates people talking about his appearance the most, it is undoubtedly a kind of masochistic restraint. Yu Wenjun suddenly thought a lot. He looked at Murong Yan full of emotion, and he could bear what ordinary people couldn't bear. Such a person would either become a wise king through the ages, or he would be a tyrant who would cause harm for thousands of years. Yu Wenjun sighed, this is the end of the matter, it's the only way to go. He looked at his well-behaved and caring daughter. His daughter was just 14 years old, fresh and lively like a willow bud, but she was about to return to the cannibalism. It's a deep house that doesn't spit out the bones. Jia, I'm sorry to you mother and daughter as a father. When Azi passed away, I promised her to protect you well, but now, I want you to go back to face Da Fang and Lejun again. Yu Qingjie shook her head. She was shocked and resisted when she first heard that her father was transferred back to Yanzhou, but when the initial surprise slowly passed, Yu Qingjie accepted it calmly, and even felt like the dust had settled in her heart. Sure enough, what should come will always come. Yu Qingjie is still running amok in the ancestral house, just to rebirth her cousin and the system. Yu Qingjie should also go back. They are the elders of my daughter. Avoiding them is not a solution. Since they will come sooner or later, it is better to come earlier. Yu Wenjun was not pleased that his daughter was so sensible, instead he felt a strong sourness. Without setbacks and harsh treatment, whose children would understand human affairs early on? Murong Yan was also thinking about Yanzhou. Is this transfer really just the hands and feet of the Yu family? Hearing the conversation between Yu Wenjun and Yu Qingjie later, his eyes moved, and he glanced at Yu Qingjie lightly. He hasn't noticed it before, but it seems that the situation inside the Yu family is also very complicated. According to their voices, the relationship between Yu Qingjie and Da Fang and grandmother Gao was not good. Murong Yan withdrew his gaze. He was not surprised that Yu Qingjie would be bullied with his temperament. However, it was still a little uncomfortable. It's like a toy that belongs to oneself and is always ravaged by oneself, and is suddenly targeted by others. Yu Wenjun's return home is a foregone conclusion. The successor prefect of Guangling County is still on the way, but Yu Wenjun has to pack his luggage first, leaving the prefect's mansion and related handover matters to the new prefect, and he takes the lead in the long journey home with not many servants and his daughter concubine. Since the end of the Han dynasty, the world has been in chaos for more than 200 years. During this period, the north and the south were unified briefly, but often enough people were not enough to breathe, and then fell apart again. After nearly 300 years of turmoil, the population of the world has dropped sharply, the land has been barren, and even the roads have become especially dangerous. From Qingzhou to Yanzhou, you need to cross 2 mountains and countless wild jungles, a total of nearly 1,000 miles. Yu Wenjun doesn't dare to take a little risk now, and would rather go far away to follow the official path, but in troubled times, there is no official path. The official road has been left unattended for a long time, and the carriages are full of potholes. Due to limited manpower, Yu Qingjie and Murong Yan shared a carriage. One of Yu Qingjie's 2 maids stayed with her to take care of her, and the other went to the back to look after Yu Qingjie's delicate luggage. It was really not an easy job to go on the road, the carriage bumped all the way, and Yu Qingjie's back hurt from the bumps. Her back hurts from sitting, and she wanted to let Bai Ji squeeze her waist, but seeing that the vixen closed her eyes and rested her mind from the moment she got in the car, no matter how bumpy it was, her back was always straight. If she softened into a puddle of mud, she would be inferior. So Yu Qingjie gritted her teeth and endured, unwilling to lose to the vixen. Fortunately, Yu Wenjun also knows that the road is not easy to walk. He is now taking his daughter and King Lanja with him. He is more afraid of encountering gangsters and robbers than anyone else. Even though there were many guards in the convoy, Yu Wenjun put safety first, and would rather walk slowly than hurry at night. When it was time to stop and rest again, the team members breathed a sigh of relief, stretched their legs and arms under the woods by the roadside, or went to the woods to solve their personal problems. Yu Qingjie's face has turned pale since early in the morning. Bai Ji looked at her heartbroken and said, "Miss, why don't I push the idlers away and you go get out of the car for some activities?" Yu Qingjie shook her head, "No need, the carriage is finally safe, I'll lie down for a while. Bai Ji responded, and she untied the cumbersome silk sash for Yu Qingjie. She was about to pour water for Yu Qingjie, but found that the kettle was empty. She picked up the teapot, bent down and opened the curtain. Miss, I'll go change a pot of water and come back, you can rest by yourself for now. Yes. Yu Qingjie nodded in response. After Bai Ji went out, there were only two people left in the carriage, Yu Qingjie and Mirong Yan. They never spoke to each other, even in class, let alone on the tiring journey. Yu Qingjie was very used to this kind of silence, and she didn't feel embarrassed at all. She was moving her legs slightly, when Mirong Yan, who was opposite her, suddenly opened her eyes, grabbed Yu Qingjie's shoulders and bowed down. Yu Qingjie was taken aback, and her elbow slammed into the car seat, causing her pain. Immediately, almost at the moment when the two of them fell to the ground, two arrows flew in from the side curtain with the sound of the wind, and were firmly nailed into the carriage. After a long time, the buzzing vibration of the tail feathers can be heard. Yu Qingjie fell into the carriage, completely dazed. Those two arrows seemed to be some kind of signal, and then locust-like arrows fell from the sky, and the sound of killing rang out in the forest. The footsteps outside the carriage were also flustered and confused. The guards hurriedly assembled to defend against the enemy, but they were caught off guard, and they couldn't even get into formation in a hurry. Yu Qingjie's ears were filled with the sound of arrows being shot into the carriage, and she didn't need to go out to know that the outside of the carriage must have been shot into a hornet's nest. Yu Qingjie had never experienced this kind of battle. She covered her ears tightly, tears welled up in her eyes, and looked at Mirong Yan in panic. What's going on outside? Mirong Yan's face was very cold. Yu Qingjie had been shaken so many times by him, this was the first time he saw such a terrifying look on his face. His eyes are not pure black, but have a faint blue light. Now those eyes are deep and deep like a whirlpool, more thrilling, dangerous and bewitching. There is limited space in the carriage, and now the sky is full of arrows. Although most of them are blocked by the carriage, there are a few well-aimed ones that penetrate the carriage at various tricky angles. Mirong Yan grabbed Yu Qingjie's arm, pulled her up almost as if he was carrying her, and quickly led her to hide in the blind spot of the arrow. The place was not that big, and Yu Qingjie was terrified. She hugged Mirong Yan tightly with her arms around her knees, and grabbed the corner of Mirong Yan's clothes tightly with one hand. Mirong Yan is too lazy to bother with her at such a critical moment. Yu Qingjie felt that it had been a long time in the carriage, as if half her life had passed, but in fact the accident happened only for a moment. When Yu Wenjun found out about the enemy attack, he felt very bad. He immediately asked people to pick up his daughter and young master from the carriage, but the driver had already been shot dead, and the horse hissed in surprise when it saw the arrow. Instinctively, he lost control and ran away. When Yu Wenjun saw the carriage stumbling away, his heart was about to jump out. He wanted to ask someone to chase him immediately, but he suddenly thought that this time the enemy attack was mostly aimed at the young master, and the people who came here must not know whether King Lanja is there or not. In the team, this will spy on them on the way. If not, since the current 9th 5-year master has really confirmed Mirong Yan's whereabouts, it would be fine to issue the beheading order directly. Why bother to ambush on the road? Yu Wenjun felt his heart pounding in his chest. King Lanja and Jiajia were together, and everyone subconsciously thought that they were female relatives. If Yu Wenjun sent a large number of people to chase the carriage, it would be harming them. The spies must have felt that Yu Wenjun had disguised King Lanja as a bodyguard and mixed in with the entourage. Their current targets are also concentrated on these people, which can be seen from the fact that the other party did not send many people to chase the carriage. Yu Wenjun gritted his teeth, and instead of sending anyone to chase the carriage, he gathered all his men and retreated. Seeing Yu Wenjun's performance, the other party became more and more sure that Mirong Yan was hiding here. In the carriage swayed wildly from side to side, and almost overturned several times. Yu Qingjie was so frightened that she didn't dare to open her eyes, and she tightly grabbed Murong Yan's arm, her nails almost digging into the flesh. Murong Yan was much calmer than Yu Qingjie, especially when he found out that there were no pursuers behind. He was determined, and was about to go out of the car window to check the terrain, but found that Yu Qingjie was holding his arm tightly. Murong Yan twitched, but found that he couldn't get it out. He was short of breath, and said coldly, "Let go." Yu Qingjie still pretended to be dead with her eyes closed, and Murong Yan was about to be laughed at by this idiot. "Now that the carriage is out of control, what's the use of closing your eyes? Let go, I'll control the horse." Yu Qingjie opened her eyes dubiously, only then did she realize that the horse had led them on a wild run for a long time, and now she no longer knew where they were. Yu Qingjie looked around in a daze for a while, and found that the vixen was staring at her unkindly. Yu Qingjie lowered her head, said "Oh," and let go of the other's hand. Murong Yan was still as stable as the ground even in the carriage that was about to fly out of the shaking. When Yu Qingjie saw him walking out half-kneeling, she was startled, and hurried forward to grab Murong Yan's clothes, and followed him slowly. "Move out of the carriage." As soon as Murong Yan got up, he found that there was resistance behind him. He lowered his eyelashes and glanced down, and found that Yu Qingjie was nestled into a ball, looking at him pitifully. The enemy was really too weak. Murong Yan finally couldn't bear to pull out the corner of his clothes, and let her follow behind him. Seeing that the vixen did not refuse, Yu Qingjie was overjoyed, grabbed his clothes with hands and feet and crawled out. Murong Yan moved nimbly and lightly in the carriage, but when she arrived at Yu Qingjie, she could only crawl tremblingly. She couldn't keep her balance several times and was about to fall. If she hadn't grabbed Murong Yan, she would have rolled down. After finally moving out of the carriage, Murong Yan half knelt outside the carriage and tried to control the horse, but the horse had already been shot with several arrows. How could a horse in a manic state be controlled by humans? Murong Yan noticed that the surrounding vegetation was becoming more and more bare, and the rocks were gradually connecting into one piece. If nothing unexpected happened, there might be a cliff ahead. Murong Yan only thought for a second, then said, "Jump off the car, you're going to fall off the cliff in a while." Yu Qingjie clasped the wooden frame tremblingly, unable to react. "The carriage is so fast, why jump?" Murong Yan narrowed his eyes and looked forward. He could already vaguely see the cliff. He picked up Yu Qingjie with one hand, and said impatiently, "Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Before Yu Qingjie could react, she felt thrown out of the car. She screamed "Ah!" until she rolled 2 laps on the grass. She couldn't believe that she was thrown out of the car by the vixen. Then the grass around her sank slightly, and Murong Yan also jumped down. When Murong Yan landed lightly and beautifully, in contrast, Yu Qingjie rolled a few times on the grass. Her hair was full of weeds, her face was disheveled, and she was in a mess. Yu Qingjie got up from the ground and angrily pulled the hay from his mouth. "Why is your heart so vicious? Save your life, be content." Murong Yan stood up as soon as she said that, raised her eyes and looked around. Yu Qingjie followed him and looked down. The mountains and forests were vast and gloomy, and the crowns of the trees formed a sea of green, and the ground below could hardly be seen. Not far away, there was the sound of a horse whining. The carriage fell to his death, and he was blind. Now, only she and the vixen are left in the world.